The wagon wheels groaned beneath us as we climbed the last hill, my twins clutching my skirts with their tiny fingers. 6 weeks of travel had worn us down to bone and grit, but hope still flickered in my chest. Somewhere beyond this ridge lay our new beginning, a husband I'd never met, a ranch I'd only seen in crude sketches, and the promise of safety my children desperately needed after their father's gambling debts had left us with nothing but threats and shame back in Boston. "Mama, are we almost there?" Eliza whispered, her voice small against the prairie wind. Her brother James, silent as always since the night the creditors had broken into our home, simply stared ahead with those solemn eyes that carried too much knowledge for a 5-year-old. "Yes, my loves," I answered, though doubt gnawed at me. Harrison Miller's letters had painted a picture of prosperity, 300 acres, a sturdy homestead, and gentle hands to help raise my children. All in exchange for a wife willing to brave the Montana Territory and bring civilization to a frontierman. What choice did I have but to believe? The driver, a weather-beaten man who'd spoken barely 20 words since St. Louis, pointed to the horizon. "Miller's place just beyond that copse of trees, ma'am." My heart quickened as we crested the hill, but instead of the promising homestead, from Harrison's letters, a charred skeleton of timber frames stood stark against the setting sun. Black scars stretched across what should have been fields of wheat. No cattle, no horses, no welcoming husband, just ashes and ruin. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. "There must be some mistake," I whispered, though the mailbox bearing the name Miller told me otherwise. The driver shifted uncomfortably on his seat. "No mistake, ma'am. Looks like Indian trouble, or maybe bandits. Been happening more since the war ended." He wouldn't meet my eyes. "Due back in town before nightfall. Can't linger here, not safe." The ground seemed to sway beneath me as I climbed down from the wagon, helping my twins to the hard-packed earth. "But my arrangement, my husband—" "Don't know about any husband, ma'am, but nobody's living here now." He hesitated, guilt flickering across his leathery face. "Town's 12 miles back, can take you there, but the hotel costs more than your kind likely has." My kind. Mail-order brides, desperate women. I straightened my spine, dignity being the only possession I had in abundance. "We'll stay here tonight. Perhaps Mr. Miller is merely delayed." But we both knew I was grasping at smoke. The driver unloaded our 3 trunks containing everything we owned in the world, accepted the last of my coins as payment, and with a reluctant tip of his hat, abandoned us to the coming night. "Mama." James spoke his first word in months, the sound nearly stopping my heart. "Where is the man from your letters?" I knelt before my children, forcing strength into my voice. "There's been a change in plans, my darlings. Tonight we'll have an adventure and sleep beneath the stars." Their small faces, trusting despite everything they'd endured, nearly broke me. I busied myself making a shelter from blankets stretched between our trunks, gathering what wood remained around the blackened foundation for a small fire. As darkness fell, we huddled together, eating the last of our journey bread. The vastness of the Montana sky, both beautiful and terrifying in its emptiness. The children fell asleep, exhaustion claiming them while I kept watch, jumping at every sound that whispered through the prairie grass. Coyotes called in the distance. Something larger moved beyond the circle of our meager firelight. "You're visible for miles with that fire, ma'am." The voice came from darkness, causing me to stifle. A scream as I lunged for the small derringer hidden in my skirts, the only protection I'd brought from Boston. A man stepped into the light, tall and broad-shouldered, with skin the color of burnished copper and eyes so dark they reflected the flames like obsidian. His clothes were a strange mixture of white man's attire and something more practical, buckskin and homespun cotton. A rifle rested casually against his shoulder, though his hands remained peacefully visible. "Didn't mean to frighten you," he said, his voice deep and measured with just a hint of accent I couldn't place. "But you're sitting at a burnt-out homestead with little ones, not the safest choice." I kept the derringer aimed at his chest, though my hand trembled. "Are you responsible for this destruction?" Something like pain flickered across his face. "No, ma'am. This was Harrison Miller's place. Raiding party hit it 3 months back while he was in town. He didn't survive the night after trying to ride back through Blackfoot territory to protect what was his." The derringer lowered slightly as his words sank in. "You knew him?" "Scouted with him during the war. I'm Talon Redhawk, half-Cherokee. On my mother's side, though I was raised mostly among white folk." He glanced at my sleeping children. "You must be the bride he sent for. He showed me your letters, said you were his last chance at something decent in this life." The small hope I'd been nurturing collapsed entirely. My husband-to-be was dead. We were stranded with no money, no protection, and nowhere to go. "He's really gone, then?" It wasn't a question. Talon nodded, then surprised me by crouching down to add wood to our dying fire. "Miller wasn't much for keeping up with correspondence. Likely his last letter reached you after he left the rest unsaid. What am I to do now?" I whispered more to myself than to him. "First, you'll come with me to safer ground for the night. Blackfoot don't usually hit the same place twice, but there've been deserters and outlaws using these burned homesteads." His eyes, unexpectedly gentle, met mine. "Tomorrow, we'll figure out the rest." "Why would you help us? You don't even know." "My name, Clara Elizabeth Hargrove, formerly of Boston, Massachusetts. Mother to twins. Makes a fine apple pie if your letters were honest." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Harrison read those letters so many times, I practically know them by heart. He was a good man, despite his rough edges. Despite everything, I felt heat rise to my cheeks." "And you? Are you a good man, Mr. Redhawk?" "Don't know about good," he replied, standing to his impressive height. "But I keep my promises. And I promised Harrison I'd look after what was his if anything happened." His gaze swept over my children. "Reckon that includes his family, even if you never got the chance to meet." Something in his steady presence calmed the panic that had been building since we'd arrived. This man knew Harrison, had been his friend, perhaps even shared his confidence. "We have nowhere else to go," I admitted, hating the vulnerability in my voice. "Then you'll come with me until you find your footing." It wasn't a question or even an offer, just a simple statement of fact. "My cabin's about 2 miles from here. Defensible position with clean water. Been scouting the territory long enough to stay alive." James stirred in his sleep, whimpering slightly. I stroked his hair, making my decision. "We accept your help, Mr. Redhawk, for tonight." He nodded once, then efficiently began gathering our belongings. "The boy looks like he carries old hurts," he observed quietly. I stiffened. "My children have endured much, but they're stronger than they appear. As are you, I imagine." His assessment held no judgment, just quiet observation. As he hefted our trunks with surprising ease, I noticed the scars on his hands, similar to the ones I'd seen on soldiers returning from the war. This man had fought battles of his own. "My husband, Harrison," I began, needing to understand. "How did he die?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Talon secured the last of our belongings before answering. "Caught an arrow in the side. I found him halfway back to his ranch, got him to town, but the wound festered." His jaw tightened. "His last words were about you and the children. Asked me to make sure the ranch would be waiting. But it's gone." I whispered. "The buildings are gone. The land remains." He looked toward the burned foundation. "Land can be rebuilt upon. So can lives." I woke Eliza and James as gently as possible, murmuring reassurances about our strange new companion. James regarded Talon with solemn curiosity, while Eliza hid behind my skirts. "Are you an Indian?" James finally asked, his voice still rough. From disuse. Talon knelt to the boy's level, his movements deliberately slow. "I'm a scout who knows this territory better than most. Some call me Indian, others call me half-breed." He held James's gaze with surprising gentleness. "What matters is what I do, not what I'm called." Something in that simple wisdom seemed to reach my son. He stepped forward and pointed to a leather pouch hanging at Talon's side. "What's in there?" "Medicine, some from my mother's people, some I learned from white doctors during the war." He opened it slightly, showing James a collection of herbs and small containers. "Knowledge from both worlds keeps people alive out here." We extinguished the fire and followed Talon through the darkness, the twins stumbling with exhaustion. Without comment, he scooped them both up, one in each powerful arm, carrying them as if they weighed nothing. The gesture, both practical and unexpectedly tender from this rugged stranger, brought unwelcome tears to my eyes. "I can manage my children, Mr. Redhawk," I protested weakly. "No doubt you can, Mrs. Hargrove. You've managed them across half a continent." His voice held no mockery. "But tonight you'll save your strength. Tomorrow will demand all you have and then some." As we walked beneath the vast canopy of stars, I realized I had entrusted my children's lives to a man I'd known less than an hour, a man with Indian blood and a warrior's scars. Yet somehow I felt safer than I had in months. The cabin appeared suddenly before us, nestled against a hillside and partially hidden by cottonwood trees. Unlike the ranch houses I'd seen on our journey west, this structure seemed to grow from the landscape itself, part white man's log cabin, part something older and more in harmony with the land. "It's not what you expected when you left Boston," Talon said, reading my expression in the moonlight, "but it's dry, warm, and the walls are thick enough to stop arrows." That last comment should have terrified me. Instead, I found myself focusing on the smoke curling from the stone chimney and the careful way he set my sleeping children down on the covered porch. "You have a fire going," I observed. "Were you expecting company?" Talon's expression remained unreadable. "I make rounds of the abandoned homesteads when I'm not guiding for the army. Too many desperate people these days, both red and white." He pushed open the door, figured someone might need shelter. The cabin's interior was surprisingly clean and orderly, a far cry from the bachelor quarters I'd imagined. A central fireplace provided both heat and light, illuminating simple furnishings crafted with evident skill. Herbs hung drying from the rafters, and books, actual books, lined a small shelf near a writing desk. "You read," I said, unable to hide my surprise. A shadow crossed his face. "My father was a missionary before he married my mother, believed education was next to godliness." He moved to a curtained alcove and pulled back the rough fabric. "The children can sleep here tonight. I'll take the chair." I wanted to object to taking his bed, but exhaustion was beginning to overwhelm me. As we settled the twins onto the surprisingly comfortable mattress, Eliza stirred. "Mama," she murmured sleepily, "is this our new home?" The question hung in the air between Talon and me, weighted with implications neither of us could answer. "Rest now, little one," I whispered, smoothing her hair. "Tomorrow is soon enough to decide what comes next." But as I turned to face my unusual host in the firelight, I wondered what choices truly remained for a penniless widow with 2 children in this wilderness. Talon Redhawk might have offered shelter for the night, but tomorrow would still find us homeless, husbandless, and at the mercy of this untamed territory. He seemed to read my thoughts, those dark eyes missing nothing. "Harrison Miller's land. Grant is still valid, Mrs. Hargrove. By law, as his intended bride with proof of arrangement, you have claim to it." "A claim to ashes," I said bitterly. A claim to 300 acres of some of the finest grazing land in the territory, he corrected. Land that men would kill for. Men already have, I whispered. Talon studied me with an intensity that should have made me uncomfortable. Instead, I found myself standing straighter under his gaze. The question now, he said quietly, is whether you're the kind of woman who turns back when the path grows difficult, or the kind who builds something new from the ashes. He gestured to my sleeping children. They deserve to know which kind their mother is. His words cut through my exhaustion and despair with the precision of a surgeon's blade, finding the core of stubborn pride I'd relied on since my husband's death in Boston. I lifted my chin, meeting his gaze directly. I've never turned back from anything in my life, Mr. Redhawk. I don't intend to start now. Something like respect flickered in his eyes. Then get some rest, Mrs. Hargrove. Tomorrow, we begin rebuilding what was lost. As I lay beside my children that night, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the Montana wilderness and the steady breathing of the stranger who had become our unexpected guardian, I wondered what Harrison Miller had told this man about me. What promises had been made on my behalf? What expectations set? More importantly, I wondered if I could possibly live up to them in this harsh land that had already claimed one man's dreams and his life. Morning came with cruel brightness, the Montana sun exposing every hope and fear I'd hidden in the night's shadows. I watched my twins sleeping peacefully on Talon Redhawk's bed, their faces finally relaxed after weeks of vigilance. How could I tell them we had nowhere to go, that their promised home was nothing but charred timber and broken dreams? Behind me, Talon moved with the quiet efficiency I was beginning to recognize as his nature, stoking the fire and setting a cast-iron pot to boil. The scent of coffee, real coffee, not the chicory substitute I'd grown accustomed to, filled the small cabin. You've been awake since before dawn, he observed, not turning around. Thinking about running back east, his perception unsettled me. I was considering all my options, Mr. Redhawk, and I find them severely limited. The bitterness in my voice surprised even me. A widow with no husband, a bride with no groom, and a mother with 2 children to feed in a territory where I know no one and nothing of survival. He poured coffee into a tin cup and extended it to me. Our fingers brushed, his skin unexpectedly warm against mine. You know me, he said simply, and Harrison's land is still yours by right. I wrapped my hands around the cup, letting the warmth seep into my bones. Land means nothing without shelter, without livestock, without seed for planting. True enough. He moved to the cabin's single window, looking out toward the distant hills. 3 possibilities lie before you, Mrs. Hargrove. Return east and face whatever drove you here in the first place. Continue to Billings, where there's a small settlement. Perhaps find work as a teacher or seamstress. Or stay and rebuild what was promised to you. With what resources? I demanded, my voice rising slightly before I glanced nervously at my still sleeping children. He turned from the window, his dark eyes meeting mine without flinching. With the only resource that matters out here, the will to survive. Before I could respond, James stirred, sitting up with the watchful caution that had become second nature to my once carefree son. His eyes darted around the unfamiliar surroundings, before settling on Talon with that penetrating stare that seemed to measure the worth of a man's soul. You have pictures, he said, pointing to marks on the cabin wall I'd overlooked in the dim evening light. Talon nodded, moving to where James indicated. His fingertips traced what I now recognized as charcoal sketches, remarkably detailed renderings, of mountains, animals, and people. My mother's people believe in capturing the spirit of things, not just their appearance. James slipped from the bed, approaching with uncharacteristic boldness. Can you teach me? Something shifted in Talon's expression. a softening I wouldn't have thought possible in his weathered face. "If your mother permits." Both turned to me, and I felt a strange tightness in my chest at the sight. My solemn, silent boy looking at this half-wild stranger with the first spark of interest I'd seen since the night the creditors had come. "We won't be staying long enough for lessons," I said carefully, unwilling to encourage false hopes. "But perhaps Mr. Redhawk could show you a few basics while I consider our situation. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." Eliza woke soon after, her usual morning timidity amplified by the strange surroundings. She clung to my skirts while eyeing Talon with cautious curiosity. Unlike her brother, whose silence had been born of trauma, Eliza's quietness was her nature, observing everything, speaking only when necessary. "Hungry, little one?" Talon asked, crouching to her level much as he had with James the night before. From a small pouch, he produced a strip of dried fruit, offering it with an outstretched palm like one might approach a wild fawn. Eliza looked to me for permission. When I nodded, she accepted the offering with a whispered, "Thank you, sir." "Not, sir," he corrected gently, "just Talon." "That's a bird name," she said, surprising me with her knowledge. A rare smile crossed his face. "My mother believed I would need to see far and fly true. Did you?" she asked with a child's directness. Something ancient and pained flickered behind his eyes. "I'm still trying, little one." That simple exchange told me more about the man than all his words the night before. Whatever Talon Redhawk's story, it carried both wounds and wisdom. We broke our fast with a simple but hearty meal of cornmeal porridge sweetened with wild honey. I insisted on helping, needing to feel useful after accepting his charity, but Talon moved through his morning routine with such practiced efficiency that my assistance seemed more hindrance than help. "You cook better than most women," I observed, immediately regretting the comparison. "I mean, I understand your meaning," he interrupted, a hint of amusement in his voice. "A man alone either learns to feed himself properly or starves. I chose the former. Have you always lived alone?" The question escaped before propriety could catch it. He scraped the last of the porridge into James's eagerly awaited bowl. "Not always, but long enough that it seems natural now." The conversation died as we ate, but I felt his eyes on me occasionally, assessing, calculating. Not in the predatory way I'd grown accustomed to from men after William's death, but with a strategic evaluation that was somehow both impersonal and intimate. "We should visit Miller's land today," he said finally, setting aside his empty bowl. "You need to see what remains in daylight before making your decision." "I've already seen enough," I replied, the memory of charred timbers still fresh. "You've seen destruction," he countered. "You haven't seen possibility." The twins looked between us, sensing the tension beneath our words. James, emboldened by Talon's kindness, spoke up. "Can we see where we were supposed to live?" His question pierced my heart. How could I deny him this chance to understand why we'd traveled so far, only to find ashes? "Mr. Redhawk believes there's something worth seeing," I said carefully. "Perhaps we should trust his judgment in this matter." Talon's expression revealed nothing, but I sensed my concession pleased him. "We'll leave within the hour. The land speaks more clearly in morning light." As we prepared for departure, I took the opportunity to wash properly for the first time in days. Talon discreetly pointed me toward a small stream behind the cabin, close enough for safety, he assured me, but private enough for dignity. The cold water revived my spirit as it cleansed my skin, and I allowed myself a moment of weakness, silent tears mingling with the rushing current. "Mama?" Eliza's small voice startled me. She stood at the path's edge, concern etching her delicate features. Are you sad? I wiped my face quickly, summoning a smile. No, darling, just washing away the journey's dust. She studied me with those knowing eyes that saw far too much. The Indian man said we might have a home here. Half-Cherokee, I corrected gently. And yes, he believes so. But it won't be what I promised you, not the fine house with a proper yard and fence. Eliza considered this with the serious contemplation that made her seem decades older than her. 5 years. I didn't like our house in Boston. Bad men came there. The simplicity of her statement struck me like a physical blow. While I had been mourning the loss of Harrison Miller's promised homestead, my children had been carrying their own burden. The memory of safety shattered when William's creditors had broken down our door in the night, threatening to take what little we had left, including, they had implied with leering smiles, me. No bad men will come here, I promised, though I had no right to make such assurances in this wild territory. Because of him? She asked. I followed her gaze back toward the cabin, where Talon stood with James, showing him how to pack provisions efficiently for our journey. The sunlight caught the obsidian darkness of his hair, tied back with a leather cord at his nape, and highlighted the powerful set of shoulders that seemed made for carrying burdens. We can't depend on Mr. Redhawk forever, I said softly. We must learn to protect ourselves. Eliza's small hand slipped into mine. But today he will protect us. I squeezed her fingers, finding unexpected comfort in her touch. Yes, little one, today he will protect us. When we returned to the cabin, I found Talon had prepared a small pack for each of the children, containing water and simple provisions. The consideration behind this gesture, making my twins participants in our journey rather than helpless burdens, touched me in ways I couldn't articulate. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The walk is not difficult, he explained as we set out, but it's good for children to carry their own water in this country. Teaches respect for what sustains life. We followed a different path than the one we'd traveled the previous night. This route clearly chosen for gentle slopes that accommodated small legs. Talon set a pace that challenged the twins without exhausting them, occasionally pointing out tracks in the dust or plants with medicinal properties. James absorbed every word like parched earth drinking rain, his usual silence transformed into an endless stream of questions that Talon answered with unexpected patience. Eliza remained quieter, but her eyes missed nothing, her hand occasionally, reaching out to touch a flower or interesting stone with careful reverence. As we crested the final rise that would bring us within sight of Harrison Miller's land, Talon stopped abruptly, his posture shifting from relaxed guide to vigilant predator in an instant. His hand moved to the rifle slung across his back, though he didn't remove it. "What is it?" I whispered, instinctively gathering the twins closer. "Horses," he replied, his voice low. "At least 3 near the burned homestead." Fear clawed at my throat. "Bandits, the ones who—" "No." His certainty calmed me slightly. "Different tracks. Stay here with the children." "You can't go alone," I protested. The look he gave me was not unkind, but brooking no argument. "I can move silently. You cannot. If there's danger, the twins need you here, not following me into it." Before I could object further, he was gone, melting into the tall grass with a fluid grace that reminded me forcefully of his Cherokee heritage. One moment he stood beside us, solid and reassuring. The next, the landscape had swallowed him whole. The children sensed my anxiety, pressing against me as we waited in agonizing silence. Minutes stretched like hours, the Montana wind whispering secrets through the prairie grass that I couldn't understand. "Mama!" James tugged at my sleeve, pointing. "He's waving." Sure enough, Talon stood atop the next rise, gesturing for us to join him. His relaxed posture told me the danger, if ever there had been any, had passed. As we approached, I saw what had caught his attention. 3 horses were indeed tethered near the burned homestead, but they weren't riderless. 2 men and a woman were examining the charred foundation, measuring and discussing with animated gestures. "Friends of yours?" I asked as we reached Talon's side. "Better," he replied, a note of satisfaction in his voice. "Friends of Harrison's. I sent word to town. Last night with a passing army patrol. You planned this," I realized, anger flaring at being manipulated. "You never intended to simply show me the land." His dark eyes met mine without apology. "I intended to show you possibility, Mrs. Hargrove. Here it comes." The strangers had noticed our approach. The older man, silver-haired but standing straight, as a ramrod, raised a hand in greeting. As we drew closer, I saw the woman was younger than I'd first thought, perhaps only a few years my senior, her capable hands roughened from work, but her smile warm as summer sunshine. "Talon Redhawk, you old wolf," the younger man called out. "When we got your message, Martha here wouldn't rest until we'd loaded the wagon with supplies." "Some of us remember what it means to be Christian neighbors," the woman, Martha, replied, her eyes fixing on me and the children with undisguised curiosity. "You must be Harrison's intended. I'm Martha Sullivan. This is my husband, John, and his father, Samuel." "Clara Hargrove," I managed, overwhelmed by this unexpected welcome committee. "And my children, James and Eliza." Martha immediately knelt, to the twins' level, her weathered face softening. "Well now, aren't you the handsomest pair to arrive in Montana territory this year? You must be hungry after your journey with this taciturn scout. John, fetch the basket from the wagon." While her husband complied, Samuel Sullivan moved forward to clasp Talon's arm in a gesture somewhere between a handshake and a warrior's greeting. "Good to see you in one piece, son. Heard you've been scouting for the army again." The old man's sharp eyes assessed me. "Harrison chose well, it seems. Got a spine in her, I can tell." "Mrs. Hargrove only learned of Harrison's passing yesterday," Talon said quietly. "She arrived to find this." He gestured toward the burned remains. Samuel's face darkened. "Damn shame what happened here. Told Harrison that ridgeline was too exposed, but he wanted the view." He turned to me directly. "Your intended was a good man, ma'am, stubborn as the day is long, but honest to his bones. What's happened to his property is no reflection on his character." "I never had the chance to form any judgment of Mr. Miller's character," I replied carefully. "Our arrangement was practical in nature." Martha returned with her husband and a basket that smelled of fresh bread. "Practical or not, you're here now, and no woman with children should face rebuilding alone." She shot a meaningful glance at Talon. "Though I see you've already found the territory's most reliable guide, if not its most talkative." As we shared the simple meal Martha had brought, bread still warm from her oven, preserves, and cold chicken, the Sullivans explained their connection to Harrison Miller. Neighbors whose homestead lay 3 miles west, they had stood with Harrison through blizzards, drought, and the constant uncertainty of frontier life. "When the raiders came through, we were bringing supplies back from Billings," John explained, his voice heavy with regret. "By the time we returned, Harrison had—" He glanced at the children and amended whatever he'd been about to say. "Well, Talon had already done what he could." "Your husband-to-be left everything in order, legally speaking," Samuel added. "Filed. His claim properly, paid his taxes. That land grants solid, 300 acres that include the best spring in the county and enough timber on the north section to rebuild twice over." Martha touched my hand gently. "What Samuel's trying to say in his roundabout way is that you have rights here, Mrs. Hargrove, and you have neighbors willing to help you claim them." I looked from these kind strangers to Talon, who had stepped slightly apart, watching our interaction, with those observant eyes that missed nothing. He had orchestrated this meeting, not to force my decision, I realized, but to show me I wouldn't face it alone. "I don't know the first thing about ranching," I confessed, "or building, or surviving. A Montana winter. John Sullivan laughed, the sound surprisingly youthful from his weather-beaten face. None of us did when we started. Martha was a Philadelphia society girl who couldn't boil water without burning it. And now I can shoot a rabbit at 50 paces and stitch the wound if you're foolish enough to get yourself shot, his wife retorted with good-natured pride. We learn what we must, Mrs. Hargrove. Eliza, who had been quietly observing from beside me, suddenly spoke up. Can we stay, Mamma? I'd like it here. You haven't even seen here properly, sweet girl, I said, smoothing her hair. Then let's remedy that, Samuel declared, rising with surprising agility for his age. John, help me clear some of this debris so the lady can see what she's really got. As the Sullivan men began systematically moving charred timbers, Martha drew me aside. Harrison wrote to us about you, she said quietly, said you were a woman of remarkable courage who deserved better than she'd received in life. He wasn't a poetic man, our Harrison, but he believed you would bring something this wild place needs desperately. What's that? I asked, touched by words from a man I would never know. Martha's eyes crinkled at the corners, wisdom earned through hardship shining in their depths. Grace, Mrs. Hargrove, and the kind of strength that doesn't need to announce itself with guns and bluster. She nodded toward my twins, now helping John move smaller pieces of wood with solemn determination. Those children deserve roots. This land offers that possibility. I turned to find Talon watching me, his expression unreadable, but his message clear. The choice was mine, but I did not stand alone in making it. For the first time since discovering the burned homestead, I allowed myself to really look at the land beyond the destruction. Rolling hills stretched toward distant mountains, the grass rippling like an emerald sea under the Montana sky. A creek glinted silver in the morning light, cottonwoods marking its winding path across what Harrison Miller had claimed as his own, and now perhaps mine. What would rebuilding even look like? I asked, the practical question emerging from a heart suddenly, foolishly hopeful. Samuel Sullivan's weathered face split into a grin. That, Mrs. Hargrove, is exactly what we're here to show you. As the old rancher launched into plans and possibilities, I caught Talon's eye. The faintest nod acknowledged what we both knew. I had already made my decision, though pride wouldn't let me declare it yet. The twins' eager faces as they helped clear what would become our new foundation told me it was the right one. Perhaps Harrison Miller had died before I could meet him, but he had given us something invaluable, a chance to build something that was truly ours, not by marriage or charity, but by the work of our own hands on a piece of earth that asked only for stewardship in return for sustenance. And as I watched Talon Redhawk kneel beside my son, showing him how to test the soil between his fingers, I wondered what other unexpected lessons this strange new life might hold. The first hammer blow echoed across the valley like a promise. I watched, breathless, as John Sullivan's strong arm brought the tool down again, driving the stake that would mark the corner of our new home. My home. The words still felt foreign, on my tongue, but with each passing hour, the land beneath my feet grew more familiar, more mine. Southeast corners marked, John called, wiping sweat from his brow despite the cool morning air. Talon, you were right. The old foundations. Too damaged to salvage, but this spot's even better. High enough to avoid spring flooding, but sheltered from the worst winter winds, Talon nodded, his dark eyes surveying the staked perimeter with careful assessment. In just 3 days, the burned ruins of Harrison Miller's dream had been cleared. Away, the usable materials salvaged, and new plans drawn up on Samuel Sullivan's precious drafting paper. 3 days of back-breaking work that had left my hands blistered and my body aching in places I hadn't known could feel pain. "Mama, look!" Eliza's voice pulled me from my thoughts. My daughter knelt beside Martha Sullivan, her small hands patting soil around a seedling. Mrs. Sullivan says these will be tomatoes by summer's end, if the frost holds off, Martha cautioned. But her eyes were kind as she guided my daughter's efforts. And if Miss Eliza here remembers to water them every morning and evening, I will, my daughter promised with such solemnity that my heart clenched. This child, who had known nothing but city cobblestones and cramped apartments, now spoke of gardens and seasons with the assurance of a born farm girl. The transformation in my twins had been the most unexpected gift of our decision to stay. James, especially, had bloomed like the wildflowers that dotted the hillsides, where once he'd been a shadow, watching the world through wounded eyes. Now he trailed after Talon with determined purpose, absorbing every lesson the scout offered about this wild country. He's a natural tracker, Talon had told me yesterday, genuine respect in his voice. Notices things most men would miss. I hadn't corrected his use of men rather than boys. Out here, childhood seemed a luxury rather than a right, and my son was growing inches taller with each sunset. Mrs. Hargrove, Samuel's voice interrupted my musings. The old rancher approached with a rolled parchment tucked beneath his arm. Found something you should see while sorting through Harrison's papers at our place. He unrolled the document carefully, revealing a hand-drawn map of the territory. X marks indicated water sources, hunting grounds, and, most surprisingly, mineral deposits. Harrison was more forward-thinking than most gave him credit for, Samuel explained. He wasn't just planning a cattle ranch. He'd surveyed every inch of these 300 acres and knew exactly what they could yield. My finger traced the careful notations. Are these gold deposits? Samuel snorted. Fool's gold, mostly. But this, he tapped a blue marking near, the creek, is something more valuable out here, clay, the kind that can be fired into bricks, and this, another mark on the northern ridge, is limestone. Properly processed, you've got the makings of a proper foundation and chimney, without hauling materials from town. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The realization washed over me like a cool mountain stream. Harrison wasn't just claiming land, he was building for permanence. For a family, Samuel corrected gently, for the children he hoped to have with you. The weight of what might have been. A life with a man I'd never met, but who had planned so carefully for our future, settled around my shoulders. Not a crushing burden, but a responsibility I found myself increasingly willing to bear. I'm sorry. He didn't live to see it, I said softly. Samuel's weathered hand patted mine. Then build it in his honor, Mrs. Hargrove. And your own. From across the clearing, I felt Talon's eyes on us. He stood apart as always, directing John and two neighbors, who'd arrived that morning to help with the heavy timber work. Though he rarely joined our conversations, he seemed to hear everything, his dark gaze missing nothing. 3 days ago, I'd expected him to leave once the Sullivans arrived, his duty to his friend's memory fulfilled. Instead, he'd thrown himself into the rebuilding with quiet intensity, his skills proving invaluable as we transformed destruction into possibility. He's not what he seems, that one, Martha murmured, following my gaze as she joined us. How do you mean? I asked, suddenly defensive, though I couldn't have explained why. Martha's lips curved in a knowing smile that made me flush. Talon Redhawk reads books in 3 languages and can quote Shakespeare when he forgets to maintain his stoic persona. During the war, he saved more men, both blue and gray, than any army surgeon, using remedies his mother taught him. Yet he lets people believe he's just another half-breed scout because it's easier than explaining who he really is. And who is that? I asked, unable to mask my curiosity. Samuel answered instead, his voice low with respect. A man caught between worlds, Mrs. Hargrove. The army values his tracking skills, but would never make him an officer. White settlements need his knowledge, but keep him at arm's length. His mother's people respect his wisdom, but remember his father was the missionary who convinced many to abandon their traditional ways. He belongs nowhere, Martha concluded. So he's made the whole territory his home instead. Their words settled uncomfortably in my chest, striking a chord too familiar to ignore. Wasn't I also caught between worlds, too educated for my new frontier life, yet unable to return to Boston society as a disgraced widow? Perhaps that explained the strange understanding that had grown between Talon and me, unspoken but palpable as the mountain air. "Mama!" James's shout broke through my contemplation. My son raced toward us, his face alight with excitement I'd feared lost forever. "Mr. Talon says I can help notch the logs for the cabin if you say it's all right." Behind him, I saw Talon watching, his expression carefully neutral, as if preparing himself for my refusal. Testing me, perhaps, to see if I would coddle my city-bred son or allow him to learn the skills he would need in this new life. "You'll be careful?" I asked, smoothing James's unruly hair. "Mr. Talon says I have to watch 3 times before I try," James reported solemnly, "and start with the smaller pieces." The caution in these instructions reassured me more than any flowery promises of safety could have. "Then, yes, you may help. But mind everything Mr. Redhawk tells you. The joy that exploded across my son's face was worth any risk." He raced back to Talon, who acknowledged my decision with a slight nod that somehow conveyed both approval and promise. The boy would be protected, taught, respected. "You surprise me, Clara," Martha said, using my given name for the first time. Most Eastern mothers would faint at the thought of putting an axe in their son's hands. "Most Eastern mothers haven't watched their children wither in grief and fear," I replied. "If this land offers them strength and purpose, I won't stand in its way." Samuel rolled up Harrison's map with careful hands. "You're more suited to frontier life than you know, Mrs. Hargrove." As the day progressed, I found myself drawn repeatedly to the ridge overlooking our building site. From this vantage point, I could see the full sweep of Harrison Miller's legacy, my legacy now. The creek, winding through stands of cottonwoods, the open meadows where cattle would eventually graze, the distant line of pine forest that would provide game and winter fuel. It was while standing there, mentally mapping our future, that I heard the approach of a horse, not from the direction of the Sullivan Ranch or the main road, but from the wild country to the north. My hand instinctively moved to the small derringer I now carried always in my pocket, Talon's first and most insistent lesson. "You won't need that." His voice came from behind me, startling me with his silent approach. "It's Nashoba." "Who?" I turned to find him closer than I'd expected, close enough that I could see the flecks of amber in his dark eyes. "My brother?" "Half-brother," Talon amended, his gaze fixed on the approaching rider. "Our mother was Cherokee. Different fathers." The rider emerged from the tree line, and even at a distance, the resemblance was unmistakable. The same powerful, build as Talon, though perhaps an inch taller. The same coal-black hair, though this man wore his longer, adorned with what appeared to be small silver beads. He rode without a saddle, his copper skin gleaming in the afternoon sun. "You didn't mention a brother," I said, surprised by this revelation after days of working side by side. Something like regret flickered across Talon's face. "We don't often travel in the same circles. Nashoba chose to live primarily with our mother's people after our parents died. I chose a different path." The weight of unspoken history hung between us, but before I could question further, James and Eliza appeared at the ridgeline, their chores apparently finished for the moment. "Who's that?" James asked, his earlier excitement giving way to caution at the sight of the approaching stranger. Talon placed a reassuring hand on my son's shoulder, a gesture that had become natural between them in just these few days. "Family," he said, simply. Someone I trust. The word trust carried such significance coming from Talon that I found myself relaxing despite the unexpectedness of this visitor. If Talon Redhawk vouched for this man, that was enough. Nashoba reached us with the fluid grace I was beginning to recognize as characteristic of Talon's people. He dismounted in a single motion, his eyes taking in our small group with intelligent assessment before settling on his brother. "The army searches for you, Niganili," he said, using a name I'd never heard before. His English was perfect, his voice deeper than Talon's, but with the same measured cadence. "I left word with the commander." "At Fort Ellis," Talon replied, frowning. "My scouting contract is fulfilled until the moon of changing leaves." Nashoba's expression remained impassive. "They do not seek you for scouting. 3 days ago, a supply wagon was attacked north of Billings, 7 dead. They blame Blackfoot raiders, but the Blackfoot signed the new treaty last month," Talon finished, his jaw tightening. "They wouldn't risk breaking it so soon. The army cares little for what is likely, only for what is convenient." Nashoba's gaze shifted to me and the children. "I see you have found Harrison Miller's bride. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us." Now back to the story. Mrs. Clara Hargrove, Talon introduced me formally, and her children James and Eliza. "Mrs. Hargrove, this is Nashoba, keeper of our mother's stories and better tracker than I ever was, though I'd deny it if he told anyone." The hint of warm humor surprised me, a side of Talon I'd glimpsed only rarely, usually when teaching the twins some new skill. Nashoba inclined his head respectfully. "The woman who was to marry runs like deer." My confusion must have shown on my face, for Talon explained, "Harrison earned that name during the war. Foolhardy courage, the kind that made men either heroes or corpses. The second, unfortunately," I said softly. "He died with honor," Nashoba offered, the words clearly meant as comfort. "Protecting what was his." James, who had been studying our visitor with undisguised fascination, suddenly asked, "Are you an Indian like Mr. Talon?" "James," I scolded, mortified by his bluntness, but Nashoba merely crouched to my son's level, much as Talon had done during our first meeting. "I am Anioniga, what you would call Cherokee. My brother walks between worlds. I keep to the old ways when I can." "Is that why you have those in your hair?" James pointed to the silver adornments I'd noticed earlier. Rather than take offense, Nashoba reached up and detached one of the small decorations, offering it to James on his palm. "This belonged to our grandfather, who was a chief among our people. He believed that carrying a piece of our ancestors keeps their wisdom close to our hearts." James examined the small silver piece with reverent fingers. "Did Mr. Talon's father make him leave your people because he was a missionary?" The innocent question landed like a stone in still water. Talon stiffened beside me, while Nashoba's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "James," I began, but Talon raised his hand. "Slightly. It's a fair question," he said, though something in his voice had changed, grown more distant. "And yes, James, my father believed I should learn the white man's ways. He sent me to school in St. Louis when I was not much older than you." "Did you want to go?" James persisted, oblivious to the tension his questions created. Talon was silent for a long moment. "I wanted to make my father proud," he finally answered, "but I missed my mother and brother every day. When I returned 5 years later, many things had changed." The profound understatement in those simple words hinted at depths of loss I could only imagine. Nashoba rose smoothly, returning his attention to the matter at hand. "The army sends soldiers to question all who might have knowledge of the attack. They will come here eventually. McPherson saw your tracks leading to Harrison's land." Talon nodded, unsurprised. Lieutenant McPherson was apparently as skilled a tracker as himself. "Let them come." I have nothing to hide. Perhaps Neshoba's gaze flicked briefly to me and the children, but they bring with them the kind of questions that stir old hatreds. Questions about loyalties. I understood then what Neshoba was truly warning about. In the aftermath of both the war between the states and the ongoing conflicts with native tribes, a man of mixed blood who traveled freely between worlds would always be suspect, especially one with Talon's particular skills. We'll handle the soldiers when they come, I said with more confidence than I felt. Mr. Redhawk has been instrumental in helping us rebuild. Any suggestion otherwise would be met with the united testimony of everyone working on this homestead. Something like surprise flickered across Neshoba's stoic features. Talon, too, studied me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. The woman speaks with a warrior's heart, Neshoba observed to his brother in a tone that might have contained admiration. Talon's response was too quiet for me to hear, spoken in what I presumed was their mother's language. Whatever he said caused Neshoba to reassess me with new interest before he nodded once, decisively. I will remain in the territory for a time, he announced. There are matters that require attention beyond the army's concerns. You're welcome. To share our fire, I offered, surprising myself with the spontaneous invitation. Such as it is, while we rebuild. Neshoba inclined his head. I accept your hospitality, Mrs. Hargrove, and offer my assistance in return. I have some skill with timber. With that simple exchange, our small community of builders expanded once more. As we made our way back down to where the cabin's framework was beginning to take shape, I noticed Eliza staring thoughtfully at our new visitor. What are you thinking, little one? I asked softly. He has sad eyes, she replied with a child's perfect perception, like James did before Mr. Talon showed him how to make a fishing line out of the mouths of babes. I squeezed her small hand, wondering at how quickly children recognized the wounds adults tried so carefully to conceal. The remainder of the day passed in a flurry of activity. Neshoba proved as skilled with tools as his brother, his strength making short work of tasks that would have taken the others twice as long. The Sullivan men welcomed him without question, a testament to Talon's standing among them that his brother required no credentials beyond their shared blood. As twilight approached, Martha departed with her husband and father-in-law, promising to return the next day with more supplies. The small tent the Sullivans had provided for me and the twins stood near where our cabin would eventually rise, while Talon had established his bedroll beneath a nearby cottonwood. "Where will your brother sleep?" I asked as we prepared the evening meal over the open fire. Talon glanced to where Neshoba sat with the twins, showing them how to weave reeds into small figures, birds and horses that delighted Eliza especially. Neshoba prefers the stars as his roof when weather permits, says buildings make him hear imaginary enemies. The casual revelation offered a glimpse into the complexities of Neshoba's life, a man more comfortable in wilderness than settlement. He seems less adapted to this world than you, I ventured carefully, or more adapted to his own, Talon countered, but without heat. Neshoba never tried to be something he wasn't. He honors our mother's ways without compromise. And you? The question slipped out before I could reconsider its boldness. Talon was silent for so long, I thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weariness I hadn't heard before. I learned to survive in both worlds, Mrs. Hargrove, but found I belonged fully to neither. It's a common enough story out here. Clara, I said impulsively, if we're to be neighbors building a life in this wilderness, perhaps you could use my given name, at least when formality isn't required. His eyes met mine, surprise evident before his expression settled into something warmer. Clara, then, he agreed, my name sounding different in his deep voice, more significant somehow, though the Sullivans may raise their eyebrows at such familiarity. The Sullivans are not building my home, I replied. You are, We are, he corrected gently, all of us together. As the stars emerged in the vast Montana sky, we gathered around the fire, not just for warmth, but for the light that kept the wilderness at bay. The twins, exhausted from their day of work and play, leaned against me drowsily while Neshoba shared stories of the territory's earlier days, before white settlers had arrived in significant numbers. "The land remembers," he said, gesturing to the surrounding hills now cloaked in darkness. "It remembers every foot that has walked upon it, every word spoken under its sky." "That's a heavy burden for the earth to carry," I observed. "All worthy things carry weight," Talon replied, his eyes reflecting the dancing flames. "The question is whether they strengthen or break us." I thought of the burdens I carried: widowhood, displacement, the responsibility of raising my children alone in this untamed country, of the weight Talon bore, straddling two worlds that often warred with each other, of Harrison Miller, who had died carrying the dream of the home we were now building. "Not break," I said finally, drawing my sleeping children closer. "Strengthen, always strengthen." Across the fire, Talon's eyes met mine in silent understanding. Whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, whether rebuilding challenges or army investigations, we would face them not as broken people, but as those made stronger by the very weights we carried. As the fire burned down to embers, I realized with startling clarity that for the first time since arriving in this wild territory, I felt not just determination to survive, but the first tentative shoots of belonging. As if my roots, so violently torn from Boston soil, were finding purchase in this Montana earth. And that, perhaps, was the most unexpected gift of all. The soldiers came at dawn, 6 of them on lathered horses that told of a hard ride through the night. I saw them first from the doorway of our tent, their blue uniforms stark against the golden sunrise. My heart stuttered in my chest before resuming. At double pace, Talon materialized beside me, his presence as silent and reassuring as always. "Stay with the children," he murmured. "Neshoba and I will speak with them." "They're here about the attack," I said, not a question but a certainty. He nodded once, his dark eyes meeting mine. "Whatever happens, remember that this land is yours. By right, the army has no claim on it or you." Before I could ask what he meant, he strode forward to where his brother already stood watching the approaching riders. The 2 men presented a striking tableau. Talon in his practical frontier clothing, Neshoba bare-chested in the cool morning air, his only concession to the approaching military being a worn cavalry jacket thrown casually over his shoulders. "Wake up, little ones," I whispered, turning back into our tent. "We have visitors." James was already alert, his eyes wide with the wariness that returned whenever strangers approached. Eliza stirred more slowly, curling into my side as I knelt between their bedrolls. "Soldiers?" James asked, reaching for the small knife Talon had given him, not as a weapon, but as a tool for the whittling he'd taken to with surprising skill. "Yes, but there's no need for concern," I assured him, gently redirecting his hand from the blade. "Mr. Talon and his brother are speaking with them. We'll join them once you're properly dressed." By the time we emerged, the soldiers had dismounted and formed a loose semicircle around Talon and Neshoba. Their leader, a lieutenant whose weathered face belied his young age, stood with his hand resting casually on his holstered pistol. "All I'm saying, Red Hawk, is that it's mighty convenient how you always seem to be elsewhere when trouble finds army patrols," the officer was saying, his voice carrying clearly in the morning stillness. "If I were present during these attacks, Lieutenant McPherson, I'd either be dead alongside your men or fighting beside them," Talon replied, his tone even but with an undercurrent of steel. "Neither scenario supports your insinuations." McPherson's gaze shifted to Neshoba, hardening visibly. "And your brother conveniently arrives just after the latest massacre. Another coincidence, I suppose." "I track those responsible," Neshoba said, his English more deliberate than Talon's but no less precise. 3 men, riding horses shod in the white man's way, carrying weapons taken from your own armory. The lieutenant's eyes narrowed. You expect me to believe renegade whites are behind these attacks, disguising themselves as Blackfoot? I expect you to follow evidence rather than prejudice, Talon interjected. The Blackfoot have honored their treaty. These attacks bear the hallmarks of men who understand both army protocols and Indian patterns. Men, exploiting your assumptions to cover their true purpose. McPherson's hand tightened on his pistol. Careful, Red Hawk. That sounds dangerously close to accusing the army of incompetence. Not incompetence, Talon countered. Predictability. I chose that moment to approach, the twins close behind me. 6 pairs of eyes swiveled in our direction, the soldiers registering obvious surprise at our presence. Good morning, Lieutenant. I greeted him with the same polite formality I'd once used in Boston drawing rooms. I'm Clara Hargrove, the owner of this homestead. May I ask what brings Army personnel to my property at this early hour? McPherson recovered quickly, removing his hat with practiced courtesy. Ma'am, we weren't informed civilians had settled. Here, this was Harrison Miller's claim, my late fiancé, I confirmed, placing emphasis on the connection. I arrived to find him deceased and his home destroyed. These gentlemen, I gestured to Talon and Neshoba, deliberately including both, have been invaluable in helping me establish my rightful claim and begin rebuilding. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The lieutenant's gaze swept over our building site, taking in the partially framed cabin, the cleared land, and the small garden Martha had helped me start. His expression shifted subtly, not softening exactly, but recalculating. My condolences on your loss, Mrs. Hargrove, he said, with what seemed genuine sympathy, but I must inform you that this territory has seen increased hostilities. This location is particularly vulnerable, being so far from the established settlements. I'm aware of the risks, Lieutenant, I replied. Mr. Red Hawk has been quite thorough in explaining them. McPherson's eyes hardened again at the mention of Talon. I'm sure he has. However, as the military authority in this region, I strongly advise you to consider relocating to Billings until these incidents are resolved. That won't be necessary, I said firmly. We have neighbors within reasonable distance, and I have no intention of abandoning the land my fiancé died protecting. One of the soldiers, a sergeant with kind eyes that contrasted with his battle-scarred face, spoke up unexpectedly. Ma'am, the lieutenant's concerns are well-founded. 3 women and 2 children were among those killed in the latest attack. His words landed like a physical blow. I instinctively drew the twins closer, feeling James stiffen against my side, while Eliza buried her face in my skirts. All the more reason to identify the true perpetrators, Talon said quietly, rather than chasing convenient scapegoats across Blackfoot territory, while the guilty remain free to strike again. McPherson's jaw tightened. You're overstepping. Red Hawk, your contract with the Army doesn't entitle you to question our tactical decisions. My contract is fulfilled, Talon reminded him. As I informed Colonel Hayes before departing Fort Ellis, I'm here as Mrs. Hargrove's neighbor and builder, nothing more. And your brother? McPherson's gaze shifted to Neshoba, who had remained impassively silent throughout most of the exchange. Is he also here in a neighborly capacity? I follow the sign, Neshoba stated simply. The men you seek traveled north after the attack, then circled east. They carry Army provisions taken from the supply wagon. A younger soldier muttered something that sounded suspiciously like thieving savages, causing Neshoba's expression to tighten almost imperceptibly, but when he spoke again, his voice remained measured. 3 men. 1 favors his right leg. Old injury. 1 rides a horse with a split hoof that leaves distinctive tracks. The third carries a rifle that fires unevenly, leaving powder residue on his right sleeve. He met McPherson's skeptical gaze. These are not Blackfoot raiders. The precision of these details seemed to give the lieutenant pause. He studied Neshoba with narrowed eyes before turning back to me. Mrs. Hargrove, I appreciate your determination to honor your fiancé's memory, but I must insist you consider the safety of your children. If you won't relocate to Billings, at least accept an army escort. That's very kind, Lieutenant, I began, choosing my words carefully. But we have protection, James interrupted, his small voice suddenly fierce as he looked up at the officer. Mr. Talon taught me how to watch for signs of danger, and Mr. Neshoba showed me which animal tracks mean predators are nearby. McPherson's expression softened slightly as he regarded my son. That's good knowledge for a young man to have, he acknowledged. But there are dangers in this territory that even experienced frontiersmen can't always predict. Like men pretending to be Indians? James asked with a child's devastating directness. A charged silence followed his innocent question. Several of the soldiers shifted uncomfortably, while McPherson's gaze darted between Talon and Neshoba with renewed suspicion. You've been filling the boy's head with your theories, Red Hawk? He asked, voice dangerously quiet. Children hear more than adults intend, Talon replied evenly. But James speaks only what he's observed himself. He has remarkable insight for his age. The compliment straightened my son's spine, his chin lifting with pride that would have been comical if the situation weren't so tense. McPherson sighed, replacing his hat with deliberate precision. Mrs. Hargrove, I've delivered my warning. What you do with it is your affair. But know this, the Army's primary obligation is to protect American citizens and interests in this territory. If evidence suggests that certain individuals impose a threat to those interests, we will act accordingly. The implied threat hung in the morning air like gunsmoke. Talon met it with the same calm resolve I'd come to associate with him. We understand each other perfectly, Lieutenant, he said, and as always. The soldiers remounted with practiced efficiency, but before they departed, the sergeant who had spoken earlier approached me privately while his companions prepared their horses. Ma'am, he said quietly, for what it's worth, I served with Harrison Miller during the war. He was a good man who spoke often of the bride he hoped would bring civilization to this wild country. His weathered face softened. He'd be proud to see you standing your ground, but he'd also want you to know when to seek help. He pressed something into my hand, a small signal whistle on a leather cord. 3 sharp blasts can be heard for miles in clear weather. If trouble comes, don't hesitate to use it. Thank you, Sergeant. Jenkins, ma'am. William Jenkins. He nodded respectfully before rejoining his unit. As the soldiers rode away, their blue uniforms eventually disappearing into the distant landscape, I realized I was trembling, not with fear, but with the aftermath of tension finally released. You stood your ground admirably, Talon observed, coming to stand beside me. Few Eastern women would face down army officers with such composure. Few Eastern women find themselves rebuilding homesteads on contested frontier land, I countered, attempting lightness I didn't entirely feel. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Talon's expression grew serious. McPherson's warning wasn't entirely self-serving. The danger is real, Clara. The use of my given name, still new enough to send a small thrill through me, underscored the gravity of his concern. I know, I acknowledged, but returning to Billings would mean admitting defeat before we've truly begun. I won't have my children believe that our response to adversity is retreat. There's wisdom in strategic withdrawal, he argued, though without insistence. My people learned that lesson over generations. And yet here you stand, I observed, neither retreating nor surrendering. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Touché! Neshoba approached, having sent the children to fetch water from the creek, a transparent excuse to allow adult conversation. The lieutenant speaks with forked tongue, he said without preamble. He knows these attacks are not Blackfoot work. Why would the army persist in that belief if evidence suggests otherwise, I asked. Talon and Neshoba exchanged a glance loaded with shared history and understanding. Politics, Talon explained grimly. The treaties are unpopular with settlers who want Blackfoot lands. If renegade whites are causing trouble while disguised as Indians, it strengthens military arguments for maintaining peace with the tribes. A position that earns Colonel Hayes no friends among territorial officials. But if Blackfoot warriors are violating their treaties, Neshoba continued, the army has justification to take more land and restrict tribal movements further. The cynical calculation behind such thinking stunned me. They would knowingly pursue innocent people while the real murderers remain free. Welcome to the frontier, Clara, Talon said softly, where justice often depends on the color of one's skin and the political winds in Washington. I closed my fingers around Sergeant Jenkins's whistle, its metal warm from my palm. What should we do? Continue building, Talon answered simply, but with greater vigilance. Neshoba will track these men. I leave within the hour. His brother. Confirmed. And I will ensure you and the children are never without protection, Talon finished. Something in his tone caught my attention. You make it sound as if you expect an attack. Not expect, he clarified, but the possibility must be acknowledged. These men, whoever they are, have already shown they're willing to kill women and children to further their aims. A chill ran through me, despite the morning sun now warming the clearing. The twins will be taught what they need to know without being frightened, Talon assured me. James already shows remarkable aptitude for reading signs and staying alert. Eliza's hearing is exceptional. She noticed the soldiers' approach before I did this morning. My surprise must have shown on my face, for he added, Children adapt more readily than adults to wilderness living. They haven't yet learned to ignore their instincts. The twins returned then, carefully carrying their water buckets between them. The morning's confrontation seemed already forgotten as they chattered excitedly about a beaver dam they'd discovered downstream. Neshoba departed shortly after, melting into the forest with such fluid grace that even knowing his direction, I lost sight of him within moments. The day's work resumed. The steady rhythm of axes biting into timber, the scrape of shovels preparing the root cellar, the thud of the hammer driving home each nail that brought our shelter closer to completion. By midday, the Sullivan wagon appeared on the horizon, bringing not only Martha and her family, but 3 more neighbors I hadn't yet met. A German couple who spoke limited English, but whose carpentry skills transcended language barriers, and a quiet widow who brought baskets of preserved foods and immediately took charge of the outdoor kitchen area we'd established. Word spreads quickly in these parts, Martha explained as we worked together sorting building supplies. Everyone within 20 miles knows about McPherson's visit by now. How? I asked, astonished. The soldiers left only hours ago. Martha smiled enigmatically. The frontier has its own way of communicating, and when folks hear the army's been pressing one of their own, they tend to rally. One of their own, I repeated, testing the phrase. Is that how they see me now? You stood your ground against McPherson, she said, as if that explained everything. And you're rebuilding despite the risks. That earns respect out here faster than anything else. The day passed in a blur of activity. With the additional hands, the cabin's framework rose with startling speed. By late afternoon, John Sullivan was discussing the possibility of raising the roof beams the following day, a milestone I hadn't dared hope for so soon. Throughout it all, Talon worked, tirelessly, moving from task to task with quiet efficiency. Though he rarely gave direct orders, the others naturally looked to him for guidance, deferring to his judgment on matters of construction and safety. It was a form of leadership unlike any I'd witnessed in Boston society, built not on declarations of authority, but on demonstrated competence and earned trust. As twilight approached and our neighbors departed with promises to return at dawn, I found Talon standing at the ridgeline, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains now burnished gold. "By the setting sun, thank you," I said, coming to stand beside him, "for everything." He glanced down at me, his expression softening in that way it did only rarely. "The community built your home today, Clara, not me alone." "The community came because of you," I countered, "because they trust your judgment." A shadow crossed his face. "Not all of them. Some came despite my presence, not because of it." I thought of the German carpenter who had pointedly avoided speaking directly to Talon all day, or the way one of the younger men had checked his rifle when Talon approached their work area. "Their prejudice is their failing, not yours," I said firmly. "A luxury of perspective afforded to very few," he replied without bitterness. "But I appreciate the sentiment." We stood in companionable silence as the light faded from the sky. Below us, James and Eliza were carefully banking the cooking fire as I taught them, their small faces serious with responsibility. "The children have changed since we arrived," I observed softly. "James especially. He speaks more in one day now than he did in a month in Boston." "This land demands voice," Talon said. "Silence is a luxury of civilization, where walls and laws create the illusion of safety. Out here, speaking up, calling warnings, sharing observations, can mean the difference between life and death." "Is that why you speak so freely with me?" I asked, surprising myself with the boldness of the question. "Because survival demands it?" His dark eyes, reflecting the last golden light of day, studied me with that penetrating gaze that always seemed to see more than I intended to reveal. "I speak freely with you," he said carefully, "because you listen without judgment. A rare quality in any world." The compliment warmed me more than it should have. "The army officer, McPherson, he seems to harbor particular resentment toward you." "Why?" Talon's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "We have history. During the war, I scouted for his regiment. There was an incident, a Cheyenne encampment that military intelligence claimed harbored Confederate sympathizers and weapons." "Was it true?" I asked, already dreading the answer. "No," he said simply. "It was a peaceful hunting camp, mostly women, children, and elders. I refused to lead the attack. McPherson didn't." The weight of what remained unsaid hung between us. "He blames you for questioning his orders," I surmised. "He blames me for being right," Talon corrected quietly, "for seeing what he chose not to see. It's a common enough burden among those who walk between worlds." On impulse, I placed my hand lightly on his arm. "I'm sorry." He looked down at my hand, then back to my face with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. "Don't be. That incident taught me to trust my own judgment above orders or expectations. Without that lesson, I might not have been the kind of man who would help a stranded Eastern widow and her children rebuild from ashes." His words struck me with unexpected force. How strange that this man, viewed with suspicion by many, caught between cultures and allegiances, should be the one person in this vast territory who made me feel truly safe. "Mr. Talon," James called from below, interrupting the moment. "We saved you supper." The spell broken, Talon stepped back, his expression returning to its usual composed neutrality. "Your son is becoming quite the capable camp cook," he observed. As we made our way down the slope, "He has an excellent teacher," I replied, and was rewarded with one of his rare, genuine smiles. Later that night, with the twins asleep in our tent and the cabin site quiet beneath a canopy of stars. I found myself unable to rest. Macpherson's warnings, Neshoba's departure to track mysterious killers, and the undercurrent of tension that had run through the day's activities kept my mind circling like a hawk seeking prey. I emerged from the tent to find Talon seated by the dying embers of our fire, whittling what appeared to be a small wooden horse. "For Eliza," he explained without looking up as I approached. "I notice she watches the Sullivans' mare with particular fascination." The simple thoughtfulness of the gesture touched me deeply. I settled onto the log beside him, drawing my shawl tighter against the night's growing chill. "Do you think Neshoba will find these men?" I asked after a comfortable silence. Talon's skilled hands never paused in their work. "If anyone can, it's my brother. The question is what he'll do when he finds them." "What do you mean?" He glanced up briefly. "Neshoba follows older laws than those written in army regulations or territorial statutes. If he determines these men are guilty of killing innocents, particularly women and children, he left the sentence unfinished. He would take justice into his own hands," I concluded, not entirely shocked by the possibility. "He would deliver justice according to our mother's traditions," Talon corrected gently, "which are often more merciful than white courts, though few would believe it." I considered this, watching the play of firelight on his strong hands as they shaped the wooden figurine with remarkable delicacy. "And what would you do if you found them first?" His movements stilled briefly. "Once I would have acted as Neshoba will. Now," he sighed, resuming his carving, "now I've seen enough death to question whether justice and vengeance can truly be separated." "You've changed," I observed. "We all change," he replied. "The only question is whether we grow or diminish in the process." As if summoned by our conversation, a distant howl echoed across the valley, a wolf calling to its pack. Talon's head lifted, listening intently to what seemed to me indistinguishable animal sounds. "3 wolves," he said after a moment. "Moving, north along the ridge, hunting. You can tell all that from a howl?" I asked, impressed despite my skepticism. A hint of amusement touched his lips. "I can tell that from tracking their movements for the past 3 days. The howl merely confirms they're where I expected them to be." I laughed softly, the tension of the day finally beginning to ease. "You enjoy allowing people to believe your abilities are more mysterious than they actually are." "I enjoy allowing people to believe what makes them most comfortable," he countered. "Some prefer to think of me as possessing arcane knowledge. Others prefer to think of me as barely civilized. Very few seek the truth that lies between." "And what is that truth, Talon Redhawk?" I asked, using his full name deliberately. His dark eyes met mine, firelight dancing in their depths. "That I am simply a man, Clara Hargrove, no more mysterious or savage than any other, just perhaps more honest about the contradictions I contain." The simplicity of his answer and the quiet dignity with which he delivered it stirred something profound within me. Here was a man who had faced the worst of both worlds, the prejudice of white society and the painful separation from his mother's people, yet had emerged not bitter but wise, not hardened but deeply compassionate. "Thank you," I said softly, "for being honest with me." "Always," he replied, the single word carrying the weight of a vow. As the fire burned down to glowing coals and the Montana night wrapped around us like a velvet cloak, I realized with sudden clarity that something fundamental had shifted between us. No longer merely Harrison Miller's friend fulfilling an obligation, nor simply a skilled frontiersman helping rebuild a homestead. Talon had become something I hadn't dared seek in this wild country. A confidant, a teacher, perhaps even a friend. And, as the wolves called again in the distance, their voices echoing across the valley that was slowly becoming home, I wondered what other transformations this land might yet work upon us all. The roof beams rose against the sky, like the ribs of some great beast, each timber slotting into place with a satisfying thud that echoed across the valley. Men called to one another, their voices mingling with the rhythmic pounding of hammers, and the occasional burst of laughter when something went right or wrong. The raising of a cabin, I was learning, was as much celebration as labor. "Mama, look!" Eliza tugged at my skirt, pointing skyward where John Sullivan and 3 other men balanced precariously on the growing frame. "Our house is getting a hat." I smiled at her description, so perfectly childlike in its simplicity. "Yes, darling, soon we'll have proper walls and a roof to keep out the rain." "And the wolves," James added seriously, from where he sorted nails into different sizes. A task Talon had assigned him that morning. "Mr. Talon says the pack is growing bolder. He found tracks near the creek yesterday." A month ago, such a statement from my son would have terrified me. Now I merely nodded, accepting the wilderness dangers as part of our new reality. "That's why we build strong walls, dear, to keep nature at its proper distance." From his perch atop the roof frame, Talon glanced down at our conversation, the ghost of a smile touching his lips before he returned to securing a particularly troublesome joint. In the 2 weeks since the soldier's visit, he had become a constant presence in our lives, teacher, protector, and architect of our resurrection from ashes. The cabin had transformed from concept to reality with remarkable speed, thanks to the continued support of neighbors who appeared each morning with tools, supplies, and willing hands. Today marked the culmination of those efforts, with nearly 20 people gathered to raise the final structural elements. The frontier remembers its own form of civilization, Martha Sullivan had explained when I expressed amazement at the community's generosity. "We're not selfless, Clara. Every barn and cabin we help build is another anchor against the wilderness pushing back." Whatever their motivation, I was grateful. With Neshoba still absent, tracking the mysterious attackers, and Lieutenant McPherson's ominous warnings lingering in our minds, the rapid creation of our shelter had become not just a comfort, but a necessity. "Mrs. Hargrove!" Samuel Sullivan's voice pulled me from my thoughts. The old rancher approached with a rolled document clutched in his gnarled hands. "I've been meaning to give you this. Found it amongst Harrison's things." He unrolled what appeared to be architectural drawings, detailed sketches of a multi-room cabin far more sophisticated than the simple structure currently rising before us. "These were his plans for after you arrived," Samuel explained, his voice softening. "Said a Boston lady deserved more than a frontier shack, planned to expand once you were settled." I traced the careful lines with my fingertip, imagining Harrison Miller hunched over these drawings by lamplight, envisioning our future together, a future now altered beyond recognition, yet somehow still unfolding. He designed a separate schoolroom, I noted, surprised by the thoughtfulness of this man I'd never met. "For the children," Samuel nodded. "Harrison was determined your little ones would have proper learning, even out here. Said education was what separated man from savage. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." I winced slightly at the phrase, my eyes automatically seeking Talon on the rooftop. If he'd overheard, his expression revealed nothing as he directed the placement of another beam. "An admirable sentiment," I said carefully. "Though I've found wisdom exists in many forms out here, not all of them taught from books." The old man followed my gaze, understanding dawning in his weathered face. "True enough. Red Hawks taught us all a thing or two about surviving this country." He rolled the plans back up and handed them to me. "These are yours now, to use or modify as you see fit." Later, as the midday sun beat down and the workers paused for the meal Martha and I had prepared, I found myself studying the community that had gathered around us. The Sullivan family formed its core, Samuel with his frontier wisdom, John with his tireless strength, and Martha with her practical kindness. but others had joined our circle as well. The German carpenter and his wife, whose broken English couldn't mask their genuine goodwill. The widow Peterson, whose quiet efficiency reminded me of my own mother. And 3 young homesteading couples who had arrived in the territory just months before us. What struck me most was how Talon moved among them, respected for his skills, consulted for his knowledge, yet still held at a subtle distance. Few spoke. To him, beyond what the work required. None invited him to share their blanket during the meal. He accepted this treatment with the same quiet dignity I'd come to associate with him, finding a place slightly apart where the twins immediately joined. Him bringing portions of the stew I'd prepared. "Your children have grown attached to the half-breed," Widow Peterson observed, appearing beside me with her characteristic silent tread. "Mr. Redhawk has been exceptionally kind to them," I replied, emphasizing his name deliberately. The older woman's shrewd eyes studied me. "Be careful there, Mrs. Hargrove. Kindness from such men often carries expectations." Heat rose to my cheeks, not embarrassment but indignation. "Mr. Redhawk has shown nothing but the utmost propriety and respect. I'd thank you not to imply otherwise." "Meant no offense," she said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "Just concerned for a young widow alone in difficult territory. Men are men, regardless of their bloodlines." "Indeed," I agreed with pointed civility. "And I've found that prejudice exists in all bloodlines as well." Her lips tightened, but before she could respond, a commotion at the edge of our clearing drew everyone's attention. A rider approached at speed, his horse lathered and heaving. "Sullivan," the man called, reining in sharply. "John Sullivan!" John strode forward, wiping stew from his beard. "Tom, what brings you out this way in such a hurry?" The rider, a rancher from further north if I recalled correctly, leaned down from his saddle. "Blackfoot War Party spotted 10 miles north of here. Burned the Petersons' outlying cabin this morning." A shocked murmur ran through the gathered workers. Widow Peterson gasped, clutching my arm. "My son's property, his family." "They're safe, Mom," Tom assured her quickly. "Got to town before the attack. But the army's mobilizing, and Colonel Hayes is ordering all outlying homesteaders to Fort Ellis for protection." My eyes sought Talon, who had risen smoothly to his feet, his expression grave but unsurprised. Our gazes locked across the clearing, and in that moment I knew we shared the same thought. These were not Blackfoot raids. "We need to finish the roof before we leave," John declared, looking up at the half-completed structure. "Can't leave it exposed to the elements." "No time," Tom insisted. "The order is immediate evacuation. McPherson sending patrols to escort. Stragglers. And you don't want to be mistaken for resistors." The community erupted into nervous discussion. Samuel argued for completing the essential work. Others began gathering tools and possessions, preparing for immediate departure. I made my way to where Talon stood with the twins, his posture alert but calm. "These aren't Blackfoot attacks," I said quietly. "No," he agreed, his voice equally low. "The timing is too convenient. Just as your cabin nears completion and the community has rallied to your side, you believe we're being targeted specifically?" The thought sent a chill through me despite the warm day. "I believe someone doesn't want this homestead rebuilt," he replied. "The question is why?" Before I could pursue this disturbing line of thinking, Martha hurried over, her normally composed face tight with worry. "Clara, you and the children must come with us to Fort Ellis. It's not safe here." "The fort is at least a day's journey," I protested. "Our wagon isn't prepared, and the children can ride with us," she insisted. "John's already loading our wagon. There's no time to argue." Across the clearing, families were already disbanding, horses being saddled, wagons loaded with frightening efficiency. The celebration of building had transformed into the grim business of flight in mere minutes. "What about our home?" I asked, looking at the skeleton structure we'd worked so hard to raise. "We can't just abandon it." Better an unfinished home than no family to fill it, Martha replied with frontier pragmatism. The army will drive the war party back, and we can return to finish the work. Talon had been silent during this exchange, but now he spoke with quiet authority. Take the children to the fort, Clara. I'll remain here to secure what we've built. Alone? I stared at him in disbelief. Against a supposed war party? I won't be alone, he said, glancing toward the tree line. Something in his gaze made me follow it, though I saw nothing but shadows among the pines, and I'm familiar with Blackfoot tactics, real and pretended. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Martha looked between us, clearly torn between evacuation orders and reluctance to leave anyone behind. The army won't look kindly on those who ignore their directives, she warned. The army and I have an understanding, Talon replied with grim humor. Go now, before you lose the light. The northern trail will be crowded with refugees. Decision crystallized within me with surprising clarity. James, Eliza, I called to my children. Help Mrs. Sullivan gather our essential belongings from the tent. As they hurried to comply, I turned back to Talon. You're certain this is necessary? I'm certain that abandoning this homestead now plays directly into someone's strategy, he replied. We've invested too much to surrender it so easily. His use of we didn't escape my notice. In that moment, Harrison Miller's land had truly become ours, not just mine, but a shared responsibility between myself and this complex man who had appointed himself its guardian. I'm staying too, I decided abruptly. Talon's eyes widened. The first time I'd seen him genuinely surprised. Clara, no. The children will be safer at the fort, I agreed, but I won't abandon what we've built here. Martha, I turned to my friend, whose expression reflected equal parts admiration and concern. Would you take James and Eliza with you? Tell them I'm staying to protect our home and that I'll join them when it's safe. They'll be frightened. Without you, she protested. They'll be more frightened if they return to find everything we've worked for destroyed again, I countered. Please, Martha, you're the only one I'd trust with them. Her weathered face softened. John won't like leaving a woman behind, especially with... She glanced at Talon, then back to me, dropping her voice. Circumstances as they are. I understood her meaning all too clearly. A respectable widow remaining alone with a man of mixed blood would raise eyebrows, even in less desperate times. But propriety seemed a luxury against the threat of losing everything we'd fought to build. Tell John that Mr. Redhawk will be sleeping in the tent, and I will remain in our wagon, I replied firmly. My reputation is less valuable than my children's. Future. Martha studied me for a long moment before nodding once, decisively. Very well, but if you're not at Fort Ellis within 3 days, John will return for you, with or without army permission. The next hour passed in controlled chaos. Martha explained the situation to John, whose thunderous expression suggested strong disapproval, even as he helped load the twins' belongings into their wagon. Samuel pulled me aside for a gruff warning about frontier justice and pressed a small revolver into my hands, a more practical weapon than my derringer should trouble find us. Hardest of all was explaining to James and Eliza why they would go without me. James, predictably, insisted on staying to help defend our home. Eliza simply clung to my skirts, her usual quietness transformed into silent tears. I need you to be brave, I told them, kneeling to their level. Braver than you've ever been. The Sullivans will keep you safe until I come for you. Promise you'll come? Eliza whispered, her small voice breaking my heart. Wild horses couldn't keep me away, I assured her, gathering both children into a fierce embrace. This separation is temporary, but our home is forever. That's why I must stay to protect it. Like Mr. Talon protects us? James asked, his young face solemn with understanding beyond his years. Yes, exactly like that. I smoothed his hair, marveling at how much he'd changed in our short time on the frontier. And when you return, we'll finish building our cabin together. As the wagons finally departed, a train of anxious settlers heading toward the promised safety of Fort Ellis, I stood beside Talon in the sudden emptiness of our half-built homestead. The silence after so much activity felt oppressive, broken only by the whisper of wind through the incomplete roof timbers. "You shouldn't have stayed," Talon said finally, though without judgment. "Probably not," I agreed, watching until the last wagon disappeared over the ridge, but some choices reveal themselves only in the moment they're made. He studied me with that intense gaze I'd come to know well. "You believe the threat is real, then?" "I believe someone wants this land badly enough to create a false threat," I clarified, "which makes me all the more determined to keep it." As twilight descended, Talon moved with practiced efficiency to secure our position. He extinguished the cooking fire, explaining that smoke and light would signal our presence too clearly. He moved our remaining supplies into the partially framed cabin rather than leaving them in the more vulnerable tent. Most significantly, he retrieved a rifle I hadn't known he possessed from a hidden cache beneath a nearby boulder. "Army issue," he explained when he caught me examining it. "A gift from a colonel who valued accuracy over regulations about arming Indians." We ate a cold supper as darkness claimed the valley, speaking little but listening intently to every sound from the surrounding wilderness. When the meal was finished, Talon rose to leave for the tent as we'd agreed in front of the others. "Wait," I said impulsively. "There's something I need to ask you." He paused, silhouetted against the deepening night. "I'm listening. Why is this land worth fighting for?" I gestured toward the darkness that concealed the surrounding acres. "It's fertile." "Yes, but so is much of the territory. Is there something I don't know?" Talon was silent for a long moment before settling back beside me. "Harrison never told you." "We exchanged only letters," I reminded him. "Practical discussions of household management and children's education. Nothing about the specific value of his claim." He seemed to consider his words carefully before speaking. "Most settlers see land as property, something to be owned, exploited, and defended. My mother's people see it differently. Land has its own spirit, its own voice. Some places speak more loudly than others." "And this place?" I prompted when he paused. "This valley sits at the convergence of 3 underground springs," he explained. "Water that never fails. Even in the driest seasons, the soil is black and rich from centuries of buffalo grazing. The surrounding ridges provide shelter from the worst winter storms." His voice took on a different quality, not the practical, frontiersman now, but something older, more connected to the earth itself. "But beyond those practical considerations, this place has power. The Blackfoot considered it healing ground. The Crow believed it was where sky spirits descended to walk among men. You're saying Harrison claimed sacred land?" The thought troubled me deeply. "I'm saying he recognized what indigenous people always knew," Talon corrected gently. "This valley sustains life exceptionally well. In a territory where survival hangs by a thread, such places become coveted." The implications settled over me slowly. "You think someone is creating these false threats to drive us away permanently, to claim this land for themselves?" "I think," he replied carefully, "that Lieutenant McPherson's sudden concern for enforcing treaties coincides remarkably well with your determination to rebuild here." "You suspect the army itself?" The idea seemed outlandish, yet I couldn't dismiss it entirely. "Not the army as an institution," he clarified, "but individuals within it who understand this valley's value. The new railroad survey places a potential route less than 5 miles from here, land that controls water and offers natural shelter. would be worth a fortune if the tracks come through. The pieces aligned with disturbing clarity. And who better to orchestrate false Indian attacks than those with knowledge of both military and tribal patterns? Talon nodded, his expression grim in the faint moonlight now filtering through the incomplete roof. Exactly. Men who could disguise their crimes behind convenient prejudices. Like Macpherson, I whispered, the lieutenant's hostile attitude toward Talon taking on new significance. Perhaps, he allowed, though accusation without proof is dangerous in these territories, especially against a uniformed officer. We lapsed into silence, the weight of these revelations pressing down like the darkness around us. If Talon was right, our enemy was far more powerful than I'd imagined, not just outlaws or opportunists, but men with authority and the protection of military hierarchy. What do we do now? I asked finally. We wait, he replied simply. Nashoba will return, with what he's learned. Until then, we defend what's ours and watch for whoever comes to test our resolve. The casual inclusion of me in that "we" warmed something deep within me, despite the danger surrounding us. No longer was I simply a widow being helped out of charity or obligation to a dead friend. I had become a partner in this frontier struggle, respected enough to be told difficult truths, trusted enough to stand guard alongside him. You should rest, Talon said, rising to his feet with that liquid grace I'd come to admire. I'll take first watch. Wake me at midnight, I insisted. I may be Eastern bred, but I'm learning frontier ways quickly enough. The smile that ghosted across his face carried genuine warmth. That you are, Clara Hargrove, that you are. He moved toward the cabin's open doorframe, but paused before stepping into the night. Why did you really stay? He asked, his back still turned to me. The truth. The question caught me off guard, yet I found myself answering with unexpected honesty. Because some things, once found, are too precious to abandon, even at great risk. He glanced back then, his dark eyes reflecting starlight. The land? That too, I replied softly. Something shifted in his expression, understanding perhaps, or recognition of a truth neither of us had dared acknowledge directly. With a slight nod that conveyed more than words could have, he slipped into the darkness to begin his vigil, alone in the half-built cabin that represented all our hopes and labor. I unfolded Harrison Miller's architectural drawings once more. In the faint moonlight I could just make out his careful planning, the schoolroom for my children, the expanded kitchen, the covered porch where he had perhaps imagined us sitting together on summer evenings. I'm sorry we never met, I whispered, to this man who had inadvertently brought me to this dangerous, beautiful place. But I promise you this, what you began, we will finish. As if in answer, a night breeze rustled through the incomplete walls, carrying the scent of pine and sage, and distant rain. Somewhere beyond our clearing, a wolf called to its pack, a lonesome sound that spoke of both solitude and belonging. I closed my eyes, suddenly achingly aware of how far I'd come from Boston's crowded streets and rigid proprieties. Here in this wild country, I had found not just a homestead, but a kind of freedom I'd never known existed. The freedom to defend what mattered, to build with my own hands, to form alliances based on character rather than social standing. And perhaps most surprisingly, I had found in Talon Redhawk something I'd never expected. A man who saw me not as a helpless widow or a convenient mail-order bride, but as a woman of strength and determination equal to his own. As sleep finally claimed me, my last conscious thought was a prayer, not for rescue or evacuation to safety, but for the courage to stand firm until dawn, protecting this improbable home we were building together from the ashes of what had come before. The crack of a broken twig jolted me awake, my heart hammering against my ribs. Moonlight spilled through the unfinished roof, casting silver-blue patterns across the cabin's dirt floor. I lay perfectly still, straining to hear beyond my own. Shallow breathing. There, another sound too deliberate for woodland creatures. Someone was moving around our homestead. My hand found Samuel Sullivan's revolver beneath my makeshift pillow. The metal felt cold and foreign against my palm, yet I gripped it with a certainty that would have shocked my Boston acquaintances. 3 nights of keeping vigil alongside Talon had transformed me in ways I was only beginning to comprehend. Clara. Talon's whisper came from the doorway, so soft I nearly missed it. "We have visitors." I rose silently, gathering my skirts to avoid rustling. 3 nights of sleeping fully clothed had its advantages in moments like these. I moved toward his shadowed figure, the revolver still clutched in my hand. "How many?" I breathed when I reached him. 3, approaching from the north ridge. His voice betrayed no fear, only focused alertness. "Not Blackfoot. They're wearing boots, not moccasins." Relief mingled with a new tension. Not the feared war party then, but perhaps something more insidious, the very men creating that fiction. "The ones Nashoba was tracking?" I asked. Talon's eyes, nearly black in the darkness, met mine. "Possibly. They're being careful, circling the property before approaching." His gaze dropped to the revolver I clutched. "Remember what I taught you? Squeeze, don't pull. Aim for the center." I finished his instructions, my voice steadier than I felt. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Let's hope it doesn't come to that." He melted back into the shadows with that remarkable silent grace, leaving me alone in the doorway. We had discussed this strategy during the long hours of our vigil. I would remain visible, apparently alone, while he circled behind any visitors. A vulnerable widow made a more tempting target than a frontier scout with a reputation for deadly accuracy. I settled on the rough-hewn log we'd been using as a bench, arranging myself to appear relaxed while keeping the revolver hidden in the folds of my skirt. The waiting stretched my nerves taut as fiddle strings, each minute feeling like an hour as I strained to catch any sound of approach. When they finally emerged from the trees, I was ready. 3 men, as Talon had said, dressed in nondescript frontier clothing rather than army uniforms or tribal garb. They moved with the confident swagger of those accustomed to intimidation achieving their goals. "Evening, ma'am," the tallest one called, affecting surprise as if they'd just happened upon my homestead. Mighty dangerous for a lady to be out here alone with all the Indian trouble. I lifted my chin, channeling the composed dignity I'd once used in Boston drawing rooms. "I'm oddly alone, sir. This is my homestead." They exchanged glances, advancing closer. The moonlight revealed details I committed to memory. A scar bisecting the leader's left eyebrow, a distinctive silver belt buckle on the shortest man, a limp favoring the right leg on the third. Matching perfectly with Nashoba's description. "Of the true attackers. Seems we heard everyone evacuated to Fort Ellis," the limping man said, his hand resting casually on his holstered pistol. "Army orders." "I answer to my own conscience, not army orders," I replied evenly, especially when those orders seemed designed to separate honest settlers from their land. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." A dangerous gleam entered the leader's eyes. "Smart woman, maybe too smart for her own good." "Intelligence has always been my blessing and my curse," I agreed, fighting to keep my voice from trembling as they fanned out before me, much like observing details others might miss. "What details might those be?" the third man asked, his tone deceptively light. I met his gaze directly. "Like how 3 men responsible for attacking supply wagons and homesteads while disguised as Blackfoot. Warriors might create convenient Indian trouble to drive settlers from valuable land. particularly land along a proposed railroad route. The casual atmosphere evaporated instantly. The leader's hand dropped to his gun. "You've been listening to dangerous talk, lady." "Or making dangerous observations," I countered, tightening my grip on the hidden revolver, "like how one of you limps from an old injury, exactly as Blackfoot witnesses described after the attack on Cedar Creek trading post." The men's expressions hardened, pretense abandoned. "You know too much for someone planning to stay alive," the leader said coldly. "We came to burn this place to the ground, didn't expect to find anyone foolish enough to remain. And yet here I am," I replied, fighting to keep my voice steady as their hands moved to their weapons. "Won't be for long," the shorter man growled. "Railroads paying too well to let one stubborn widow stand in the way." So there it was, confirmation of exactly what Talon had suspected. These men were hired by railroad interests, creating false Indian attacks to clear valuable land for the coming tracks. The perfect scheme, exploiting frontier fears and prejudices to mask simple, brutal greed. "The railroad won't want land stained with innocent blood," I said, stalling for time, wondering desperately where Talon was positioned. The leader laughed, an ugly sound in the night stillness. "Lady, railroads are built on nothing but blood. The Chinese who lay the tracks, the Indians who fight it, the settlers who get in the way. Doesn't matter to the men in Chicago counting their money." He drew his pistol with practiced speed. Nothing personal, just business. The world narrowed to a single point of focus, the yawning barrel of his gun catching moonlight. Samuel Sullivan's revolver felt impossibly heavy in my hand as I started. To raise it, I would never know if I could have fired first, because at that precise moment, chaos erupted. A shadow detached itself from the cabin's half-built wall, Talon, launching himself at the leader with deadly precision. Simultaneously, another figure burst from the tree line, tackling the limping man with bone-jarring force. Neshoba! I gasped, recognizing Talon's brother in the split second before the third attacker swung toward me, his gun rising. This time, my hand didn't hesitate. The revolver bucked against my palm, its report deafening in the night air. The man staggered, clutching his shoulder, his own shot going wild as he collapsed to his knees. Everything blurred into frantic motion. Talon and the leader grappled in the dirt, while Neshoba subdued the limping man with ruthless efficiency. My attacker struggled to raise his gun again despite his wound, determination blazing in his eyes. "Don't," I warned, aiming the revolver at his chest, with hands that somehow remained steady. "The next shot won't be so merciful." Whether he believed me or simply lacked the strength to continue, the man slumped in defeat, his weapon falling from nerveless fingers. Within moments, it was over. 3 attackers subdued, disarmed, and bound with the same ropes they'd likely planned to use in destroying our homestead. Talon sported a bloody lip, but seemed otherwise unharmed. Neshoba moved with the lithe grace of a predator, securing knots with practiced hands that showed no gentleness. "You returned," I said to him, still gripping the revolver so tightly, my fingers ached. Neshoba's dark eyes, so like his brother's yet fundamentally different, assessed me with new respect. "I followed their trail for 3 days. They led me here." His gaze shifted to the man I'd shot, who was moaning softly. "You fight well for a white woman." Coming from him, I understood this was high praise indeed. Neshoba arrived just as I was. "Positioning myself," Talon explained, wiping blood from his mouth. "Fortunate timing." "Spirits guide feet when paths align," his brother replied cryptically. The leader of the attackers spat blood onto the dirt. "You're dead, all of you. When Lieutenant McPherson hears—" "When Lieutenant McPherson hears what?" Talon cut him off, crouching to eye level with the bound man. "That his hired thugs failed to run off a widow and her children? That they confessed to creating false Indian attacks to steal land for the railroad?" Fear flickered across the man's face. "We never said—" "I heard every word," I interrupted, stepping forward, as did two witnesses with impeccable reputations for honesty. Your employer has abandoned you to your fate, I'm afraid. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Talon straightened, his expression grim but satisfied. Dawn's coming. Neshoba will take these men to Fort Ellis. The army may be corrupt in parts, but Colonel Hayes is an honorable man. He'll want evidence that his lieutenant has been orchestrating these attacks. You can't prove anything, the limping man growled. It's our word against yours, and nobody believes a half-breed and a woman. Perhaps, Neshoba agreed with dangerous calm, but they will believe this. From inside his jacket, he withdrew several items, a military-issue notebook, papers bearing official army stamps, and most damning of all, a distinctive silver insignia of lieutenant's rank. Found in your saddlebags, Neshoba explained to their shocked expressions. Lieutenant McPherson is most careless with his personal possessions when instructing hired killers. The men's expressions confirmed the truth before they could muster denials. They had been following McPherson's orders, creating a fiction of Indian hostilities to serve railroad interests and their own greed. You'll leave at first light, Talon told his brother. I'll remain here with Mrs. Hargrove until it's safe. To retrieve her children. Neshoba nodded once, his eyes communicating something private to his brother before he moved to guard our captives. The immediate danger had passed, but the night's tension lingered in my rigid shoulders and racing heart. Talon guided me gently away from the bound men, his hand barely touching my elbow. You handled yourself well, he said quietly. Many experienced frontiersmen would have faltered. The praise warmed me even as delayed reaction set in, making my hands tremble. I shot a man, I whispered, the reality of it suddenly overwhelming. You protected your home, he corrected. There's a difference. Home. The word resonated through me with surprising power. This half-built cabin, this plot of contested earth, it had indeed become home, worth defending with lethal force if necessary. When had that transformation occurred? When had Harrison Miller's promised land become truly mine? Will it end with McPherson? I asked as dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, painting the unfinished roof beams with pale gold. Or are there others who covet this land? Talon's expression grew thoughtful. The railroad still needs a route through this valley, but without the fiction of Indian attacks to drive settlers away, they'll be forced to negotiate honestly or find another path. His eyes met mine. It will require vigilance, but not violence, from here forward. The relief that flooded through me was so profound I nearly swayed on my feet. Talon's hand steadied me, strong and certain. You should rest, he said. Dawn brings new challenges. I think I've slept enough for one night, I replied wryly, glancing toward where Neshoba stood watch over our captives. Will your brother be safe taking them to Fort Ellis alone? A hint of a smile touched Talon's lips. Neshoba survived 3 years alone in Crow territory when most thought him dead. These men present no challenge to him. As if sensing our discussion, Neshoba glanced our way. In the growing light, the resemblance between the brothers was more pronounced, yet the differences more striking. Neshoba wilder, more elemental. Talon equally powerful, but containing that strength within a more measured exterior. He came back for you, I observed quietly, despite your different paths. Blood calls to blood, Talon replied simply, as does the truth. We worked together as the sky brightened, preparing a cold breakfast and gathering provisions for Neshoba's journey. The prisoners watched with sullen resignation, their earlier bravado dissolved into the silence of men contemplating hangman's justice. When all was ready, Neshoba approached me, while Talon secured the horses they would use. You stood your ground, he said without preamble. Few would have done so. I had something worth defending, I replied. His dark eyes, so penetrating and direct, studied me with unnerving intensity. My brother has found his path, he said finally, the non sequitur confusing me until he continued, the one our mother hoped for him, between worlds but belonging to himself. Before I could formulate a response to this cryptic statement, he reached into a pouch at his waist and withdrew something small and silver, one of the decorations from his hair, similar to what he had shown James days earlier. For the boy, he said, pressing it into my palm. Tell him it brings clear sight when paths grow dark. The gift moved me deeply, not just for its inherent value, but for what it represented. Neshoba's acknowledgement of James, of me, as somehow connected to him through his brother. Thank you, I said, closing my fingers around the small talisman. He will treasure it. Neshoba nodded once, then turned away, the conversation clearly finished in his view. Minutes later he departed with the prisoners securely bound to their mounts, his straight-backed figure gradually disappearing down the trail toward Fort Ellis, and whatever justice awaited McPherson and his conspirators. In their wake, a strange peace settled over our homestead. Talon and I moved through the morning's tasks with the comfortable rhythm we'd established during our days of rebuilding, checking the roof structure for any damage during the night's confrontation, securing tools that had been left behind in the hasty evacuation, assessing what could be accomplished while we waited for safe passage to retrieve the twins. You're quieter than usual, Talon observed, as we worked side by side, reinforcing a corner post. I hadn't realized he'd been cataloging my normal conversational patterns. I'm wondering what we'll tell the children, I admitted. How much truth they can bear. His hands, never idle, continued their skilled work as he considered my question. Children understand more than we credit them, he said finally, especially those who have already faced hardship. False comfort insults their experience. But I don't want them afraid, I countered. They've known too much fear already. Then tell them not what happened, but what it means, he suggested. That those who threatened us have been captured, that their home will be completed, that their mother defended what belongs to them with courage and conviction. His words stirred something profound within me, not just the practical advice about the children, but the implicit recognition of my transformation. I was no longer just a displaced widow seeking shelter, but a frontier woman who had stood her ground against those who would take what was hers. When did you begin to see me so clearly? I asked impulsively. Talon's hands stilled on the wooden beam. I saw you. Clearly from the first night, he said quietly. A woman who had traveled across half a continent with 2 children and nothing but hope, only to find ashes instead of welcome, yet who still stood straight and faced whatever came next. The simple honesty of his assessment struck deeper than flowery compliments ever could have. I didn't feel brave then, I confessed. I felt desperate. True courage often begins in desperation, he replied. Few choose danger without necessity pressing them forward. We worked in companionable silence after that, the day warming around us as the sun climbed higher. By midday we had accomplished more than seemed possible, the roof structure secured, one wall fully completed, the foundation for a proper stone. Hearth laid out according to Harrison's plans. As we paused to eat a simple meal, I found myself studying Talon's profile against the vast Montana sky. The man who had been a mysterious figure that first night at the burned homestead had become, what exactly? More than a guide, more than a builder. A friend, certainly, but even that word seemed inadequate for the bond forged through shared danger and common purpose. You're staring, he observed without looking up from the jerky he was slicing. Heat rose to my cheeks. I was thinking about how much has changed since we met. He glanced up then, something unreadable flickering in his dark eyes. Regrets? Not one, I replied honestly. Though I doubt Harrison Miller envisioned this particular future when he sent for a mail-order bride. A hint of a smile touched Talon's lips. Harrison was more perceptive than most gave him credit for. He chose you specifically, Clara, from many who responded to his advertisement. This was news to me. He had other applicants? Talon nodded. Several. Some with more impressive social credentials, some with greater financial resources to contribute. To his homestead, he passed me a portion of the dried meat. He showed me their letters once, when he'd had too much whiskey one night in Billings. Said they all wrote about what they wanted from him. Security, land, a fresh start. And mine was different. I couldn't recall anything particularly noteworthy about my application to become Harrison Miller's wife. You wrote about what you hoped to give, not what you expected to receive, Talon said simply. About teaching your children to respect the land that would feed them. About bringing music and books to balance the hardship of frontier life. About building something that would outlast you both. I remembered those words, written in a desperate hour after William's creditors had made their thinly veiled threats. I had poured my hopes for the twins into that letter, seeing Montana Territory not as an escape, but as a foundation for something better than what we were leaving behind. Harrison said he wanted a woman who understood that frontier life wasn't about taking from the land, but building with it, Talon continued. He believed you were that woman. He wasn't wrong. The validation from beyond the grave touched me deeply, confirming that though the path had twisted in unexpected ways, I was indeed fulfilling the promise Harrison Miller had seen in my words. As afternoon stretched toward evening, a new sound reached us, the distant approach of horses and wagons from the direction of Fort Ellis. Talon tensed beside me, reaching instinctively for his rifle. Army escort, he said after a moment's careful listening. At least 6 horses, 2 wagons. We moved to the edge of our clearing, waiting as the procession came into view. I recognized Samuel Sullivan's wagon in the lead, flanked by mounted soldiers in army blue. Behind them came another wagon driven by John Sullivan, and my heart leaped at the sight of 2 small figures perched beside him, James and Eliza, returning home. But my joy faded as I noted the grim expressions on the soldiers' faces, the formal precision of their formation. This was not simply an escort for returning settlers. As they drew closer, I saw the reason why, seated in the second wagon, hands bound before him, was Lieutenant McPherson. His face was a mask of cold fury, his uniform immaculate despite his obvious status as prisoner. Beside me, Talon exhaled slowly. Seems Neshoba's evidence reached Colonel Hayes sooner than expected. The caravan halted before our half-built cabin. The officer leading the escort, a captain by his insignia, dismounted and approached us with formal correctness. Mrs. Hargrove, he greeted me with a respectful nod. Captain Thomas Anderson, Fort Ellis Command. Colonel Hayes sends his compliments, and his personal assurance that the threat to your property has been addressed. His careful phrasing told me volumes about the political complications this situation presented for the army. Thank you, Captain, I replied with equal formality. I appreciate the Colonel's commitment to justice. The captain's eyes flicked briefly to Talon, whose presence beside me clearly complicated his prepared speech. The Colonel also wished me to convey his regrets that certain elements within the military contributed to your difficulties. He has personally reviewed the evidence provided by... He hesitated fractionally. Mr. Neshoba Redhawk, and found it compelling enough to take immediate action. From the second wagon, McPherson's voice rang out with bitter venom. Compelling evidence provided by a half-breed savage and a woman desperate enough to become a dead man's wife. Hayes has lost his mind if he thinks this charade will stand up to inquiry. The captain's expression tightened with professional embarrassment. Lieutenant McPherson is being returned to Fort Ellis to face court-martial on charges of conspiracy, falsification of reports, and dereliction of duty. His associates have provided extensive confessions regarding their activities. Under what duress, I wonder? McPherson called, straining against his bonds. Whatever these savages promised you, Mrs. Hargrove, it won't stand against the railroads. Interests, this land will be cleared one way or another. Before the captain could silence him, Talon spoke, his voice carrying quiet authority. The railroad can negotiate fair payment for right-of-way access, Lieutenant. There was never need for blood or fire. McPherson's eyes blazed with naked hatred. You think this is just about a railroad? This valley was promised to men who fought for this country, not half-breeds playing both sides or women who— That's enough, Lieutenant. Captain Anderson cut him off sharply. One more word and you'll be gagged for the remainder of the journey. The threat silenced McPherson, though the malevolence in his gaze as it shifted between Talon and me promised this conflict was far from resolved. Throughout this tense exchange, I had been aware of the twins watching wide-eyed from John Sullivan's wagon. Now unable to contain themselves any longer, they scrambled down and raced toward me. I knelt, gathering them into my arms with a fierceness that surprised even me, breathing in their familiar scents mixed with the dust of travel. You're safe, James said with wonder, pulling back to study my face. Mrs. Sullivan said you stayed to protect our home. I did, I confirmed, smoothing his tousled hair. Mr. Talon and I defended what's ours. Eliza's small arms tightened around my neck. Did the bad men come? I exchanged a glance with Talon over her head, silently consulting about how much truth to share. They did, I admitted, but they discovered we were stronger than they expected. James turned to Talon, hero worship naked in his young face. Did you fight them, Mr. Talon? Talon crouched to the boy's level, his usually stern features softening as they always did with my son. Your mother fought hardest of all, he said, the simple statement filling me with quiet pride. She stood her ground when many would have fled. As the captain organized his men to continue their journey to Fort Ellis with their prisoner, the Sullivans and several other neighbors began unloading supplies and tools, ready to resume the work of building our home. The homestead that had stood eerily empty that morning now bustled with renewed purpose and energy. Martha embraced me warmly, her weather-worn face alight with relief. When Neshoba arrived with those men and their confessions, I nearly fainted. Dead away, she admitted, to think you faced such villains alone. Not alone, I corrected, my eyes finding Talon across the clearing where he was already directing the resumed construction efforts. Never alone. Martha followed my gaze, understanding dawning in her kind eyes. No, she agreed softly. I suppose not. As twilight painted the Montana sky in shades of amber and violet, I stood watching the community that had rallied around us transform the skeleton structure into something more recognizably a home. The roof would be completed before nightfall, the remaining walls framed by tomorrow's end. What had begun as Harrison Miller's dream continued as my desperate gamble had become a shared vision, not just for me and my children, but for Talon, whose quiet presence had somehow become the cornerstone upon which everything else rested. We're really staying, aren't we, Mama? Eliza asked, slipping her small hand into mine as we watched the activity together. Forever? I squeezed her fingers gently, my eyes meeting Talon's across the busy clearing. Something unspoken passed between us, a recognition of paths converging, of futures intertwining in ways neither of us could have anticipated. Yes, little one, I replied, certainty filling me like the golden light of the setting sun. We're home. The valley lay draped in autumn gold, cottonwoods blazing yellow against the deepening blue of Montana's vast sky. From the porch of our completed cabin, I watched James and Eliza collecting late-season berries along the creek bank. They're small, figures dwarfed by the immensity of the landscape that had become their playground. 3 months since McPherson's arrest. 3 months of building, planting, learning. 3 months of transforming Harrison Miller's vision into something uniquely our own. The cabin had exceeded my expectations. Sturdy logs chinked with clay and straw, a stone fireplace that drew perfectly even in strong winds, windows of real glass brought all the way from Billings at considerable expense. The roof hadn't leaked once during the late summer thunderstorms, a testament to Talon's exacting standards and the community's skilled hands. Inside, Harrison's architectural plans had been adapted to our needs. The main room slightly smaller, than designed to allow for a separate sleeping space for the twins, the promised schoolroom, now doubling as my bedroom. Simple furniture crafted by John Sullivan and the German carpenter filled the spaces. A sturdy table, benches with backs for comfort, beds raised off the floor with proper rope supports. It wasn't Boston elegance, but it possessed something my previous life had lacked, a sense of honest purpose, where every item served a function and beauty emerged from utility rather than ornament. Wool gathering again? Martha Sullivan's voice startled me from my reverie. She climbed the porch steps, basket laden with late vegetables from her garden. "You've got that faraway look," I smiled, accepting the basket gratefully, just marveling at how much has changed since spring. "Including you," she observed with characteristic directness. "You stand differently now, more planted." The description resonated. I did feel more grounded, as if my roots had finally found soil deep enough to hold. "The land changes those who work it," I said, echoing something Talon had once told me. Martha's eyes crinkled knowingly. "And those who share the work change each other." Her gaze drifted toward the northern ridge, where Talon was checking the hunting snares he'd taught James to help set. "Speaking of which, when are you going to put that man out of his misery?" Heat rushed to my cheeks. "Martha, that's hardly proper, conventional." She snorted, settling her ample frame onto the bench beside me. "Those luxuries burned with your first homestead, Clara. Out here, we see clearly or we perish." Her voice softened. "He's been building his own cabin up by the North Spring, you know." This was news that simultaneously relieved and distressed me. Talon had been living in a tent near our home since the rebuilding began, a situation that had raised eyebrows but had been grudgingly accepted given the circumstances. That he was establishing his own permanent dwelling nearby meant he planned to stay, but also to maintain a proper distance. "It's complicated," I said finally. "Only because you make it so." Martha shook her head. "The man hasn't taken his eyes off you in 3 months except to watch over those children as if they were his own blood." Before I could formulate a response, hoofbeats approached from the main trail. We both turned to see Samuel Sullivan riding toward us, his usually cheerful face set in grim lines. "Martha, Clara," he greeted us brusquely, dismounting with a stiffness that spoke of his advancing years. "Where's Red Hawk?" "Checking the snares," I replied, alarm growing at his serious demeanor. "What's happened?" Samuel glanced toward the children, ensuring they were out of earshot. "McPherson's been acquitted." The simple statement landed like a physical blow. How is that possible? The evidence provided by a half-Cherokee scout and coerced from honest settlers under duress didn't stand against the testimony of a decorated army officer. Samuel spat bitterly. "The military court found insufficient proof of conspiracy. He's been reassigned to Fort Laramie with a formal reprimand for administrative oversights. Nothing more." Martha gasped beside me, her hand finding mine in a gesture of support. "When?" was all I could manage. "Word came by telegraph. To Billings yesterday. Ryder brought the news to our place this morning." Samuel removed his hat, twisting it anxiously in his weathered hands. That's not the worst of it. Macpherson filed formal documents challenging the legitimacy of your claim before he left. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. On what grounds? My voice sounded distant to my own ears, shock numbing my thoughts. Technical irregularities in Harrison's filing, Samuel replied. And he hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. Allegations regarding your relationship with Talon Redhawk, casting doubt on your moral fitness to hold a federal land grant. Martha's grip on my hand tightened painfully. That's outrageous. Clara has conducted herself with perfect propriety under impossible circumstances. Propriety doesn't matter, a deep voice interjected. Talon stood at the edge of the clearing, James perched on his shoulders, examining something clutched in his small hands. He lifted my son down carefully before approaching. Only perception. Macpherson knows exactly what he's doing. He can't possibly succeed, I protested, though uncertainty gnawed at my conviction. The land is legally mine through Harrison's betrothal agreement. Talon's expression remained carefully neutral, but I had learned to read the tension in his shoulders, the subtle tightening around his eyes. Macpherson has powerful allies among the railroad interests. They still want this valley for the cut-through route. What can we do? I asked, fighting to keep my voice steady for James's sake, as he joined us on the porch, proudly displaying a rabbit caught in one of the snares. Look, Mama, I checked it just like Mr. Talon showed me. His face fell as he registered the adult's serious expressions. What's wrong? I forced a smile, brushing hair from his forehead. Nothing you need worry about, love. Why don't you show Martha your catch? Perhaps she'll tell you how to prepare it for stewing. Once James was distracted by Martha's exaggerated admiration of his hunting prowess, Talon drew me and Samuel aside. We need to strengthen the legal claim, Talon said quietly. The land office in Helena holds final authority. If we can secure improper documentation before Macpherson's challenge proceeds through military channels, I'll write to Helena myself, Samuel offered immediately. John can manage the ranch for a few days. The journey's too hard for you alone, Talon objected, and Helena's clerks might not be sympathetic to our case without proper persuasion. I understood his meaning immediately. You believe they've been influenced already. I believe Macpherson would leave nothing to chance, he replied grimly. This vendetta has become personal for him, not just about the land anymore, but about defeating those who exposed his corruption. Then I'll go with you, I decided, the words emerging before I'd fully formed the thought. My presence as Harrison's intended bride might sway the officials. Talon shook his head. Leaving the homestead now could be seen as abandonment, strengthening Macpherson's case. You need to remain visibly in possession of the property, I wanted to argue, but the logic was irrefutable. Macpherson was playing a game whose rules had been written by men like him, men who understood how to manipulate systems of power to their advantage. Then who? I began, but fell silent as hoofbeats once again approached our clearing. This time the rider made my heart stutter with recognition. Neshoba, his dark hair gleaming in the autumn sunlight, his posture as straight and proud as when he'd departed months ago. He dismounted with fluid grace, acknowledging our presence with a slight nod before addressing his brother in their native tongue. While they conversed in rapid syllables I couldn't comprehend, Samuel leaned closer. Didn't expect to see him again, he murmured. Rumor said he'd returned to the reservation after delivering evidence against Macpherson. Rumors rarely capture. The whole truth, I replied, watching the brothers' intense conversation. Though I couldn't understand their words, the gravity of their exchange was evident in their expressions and clipped gestures. Finally, Talon turned back to us. Neshoba brings news. Macpherson has already dispatched men to Helena with documentation. challenging your claim. They left Fort Ellis 2 days ago." "Then it's too late," Samuel groaned. "Even riding hard, we couldn't reach the land office before them." "There may be another way," Talon said, his eyes meeting mine with unusual intensity. "A legal solution that would make the challenge irrelevant." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "What kind of solution?" I asked, something in his tone making my pulse quicken. Talon hesitated, a rare uncertainty crossing his features. "It would require significant sacrifice from you, Clara. I wouldn't suggest it if the situation weren't dire." "Stop talking around it," Samuel snapped impatiently. "What's your plan?" "Marriage," Talon stated simply. "If Clara weds before the challenge is officially registered, her husband would automatically share legal ownership of the homestead. A married woman's claim, especially one with children, is virtually unassailable under territorial law." Stunned silence followed his words. Marriage. The suggestion hung in the air between us, laden with implications neither of us had dared voice during our months of working side by side. "To whom would I be marrying?" I finally asked, though I already knew the answer. "John Sullivan is respected throughout the territory," Talon replied, his face impassive. "A widower with established property and unimpeachable standing among settlers. The land office would have no grounds to question his right to defend the combined homestead. Not himself." The realization struck with unexpected force, leaving me momentarily speechless. Of course, Talon wasn't suggesting our marriage. A union between us would only strengthen McPherson's allegations and perhaps create new vulnerabilities in my claim. Samuel stroked his chin thoughtfully. "John's never mentioned remarrying since Elizabeth passed, but for something like this, to help neighbors in need." He nodded slowly. "He might consider it. A marriage of convenience, understood by all parties." I struggled to gather my scattered thoughts. The logical part of my mind recognized the elegant solution this presented. John Sullivan was indeed respected, financially secure, and had shown nothing but kindness to me and the twins. A union with him, even in name only, would secure our future against McPherson's machinations. Yet something within me rebelled at the cold practicality of it all. I had traveled west as a mail-order bride, prepared to enter a marriage of convenience. With Harrison Miller, why did this proposal, equally practical, feel so fundamentally wrong? My eyes found Talon's, searching for some hint of his true feelings beneath that carefully maintained composure. Did he want this solution? Was he simply being pragmatic about what would best secure the land? Or was there something more personal in his suggestion, a noble sacrifice of his own unspoken desires? "I should speak with the children," I said finally, needing space to think clearly. "This affects them as much as me." "Of course," Samuel agreed quickly. "And I'll ride back to discuss it with John. No promises, but—" He trailed off awkwardly. As the men dispersed, Samuel returning to his horse, Neshoba and Talon moving toward the creek to give me privacy, I sank onto the porch steps, mind reeling. Martha settled beside me, her solid presence a comfort in the sudden chaos of my thoughts. "Quite a proposal," she observed dryly, "though not the one I expected to hear today." "It makes perfect sense," I said, more to convince myself than her. "John is a good man. The twins already know and trust him." Martha studied me with shrewd eyes. "And yet you look like someone just suggested you drink vinegar instead of wine." "Is my disappointment so obvious?" I asked quietly. "Only to another woman," she assured me, patting my hand. "Men are remarkably blind to certain things, even observant ones like Talon Redhawk." I watched him by the creek bank, crouched beside Eliza as she showed him something cupped in her small palms, probably one of the colorful stones she collected with religious devotion. The gentleness with which he attended to her childish enthusiasm, The patient way he answered her endless questions, the protective stance he naturally adopted whenever the twins were near, all these had become as much a part of our daily life as sunrise and sunset. I thought perhaps I couldn't finish the sentence, the admission too vulnerable even for Martha's sympathetic ears. You thought perhaps he felt as you do, she completed gently. And perhaps he does, but Talon Redhawk has spent his entire life navigating between two worlds, always calculating the costs of belonging to either. This may be his way of protecting you from those costs. Her insight struck uncomfortably close to truth. Talon had once told me that frontier life taught brutal honesty about what must be sacrificed for survival. Perhaps this was his form of honesty, recognizing that a future between us would always carry the shadow of prejudice, always make our claim to this land more vulnerable to men like Macpherson. "What should I do?" I whispered. Martha's weathered face softened. "Only you can answer that, Clara. But remember this, out here we don't often get second chances. Whatever you decide, be certain it's something you can live with through long winter nights and lonely summer days." The weight of the decision pressed upon me through the remainder of the afternoon as I went through the motions of normal routine, preparing the evening meal, helping James with his reading lessons, listening to Eliza practice the simple songs Martha had been teaching her. All the while, awareness of Talon's presence near the cabin hummed beneath my skin like a plucked string. After the children were finally asleep, tucked into their beds with prayers said and stories told, I emerged to find him sitting alone by the small fire outside. Neshoba had disappeared again, melting into the darkness with that uncanny ability both brothers shared. "Where does he go?" I asked, settling on the log beside Talon, close enough for warmth but with proper space between us. "Neshoba prefers the open sky," Talon replied, his eyes remaining on the dancing flames. "Says walls make him forget how to listen properly." Silence stretched between us, not the comfortable quiet we usually shared, but something loaded with unspoken words. Finally, I gathered my courage. "Did you mean it?" I asked softly. "About John Sullivan?" Talon's profile remained impassive in the firelight. He would be a good match, respected, established, kind to the children. That wasn't my question. His eyes finally met mine, dark with emotions I couldn't fully decipher. "What would you have me say, Clara? That I've thought of another solution, that I've imagined—" He stopped abruptly, turning back to the fire. "What I imagine doesn't matter. What matters is securing your future here." "Our future," I corrected, gently. "Yours has become entwined with ours, whether you intended it or not." Something flickered across his face, a brief crack in the careful composure he maintained. "That's precisely why I cannot be selfish in this." "Is it selfish to speak the truth?" I pressed, heart pounding so loudly I was certain he must hear. "It. To acknowledge what has grown between us these past months." His hands, always so steady, clenched slightly where they rested on his knees. "You know what would happen, Clara. The whispers have already started. The Sullivan boy refused to let James ride with him last week. Widow Peterson crosses to the other side when she sees me approach in town. I don't care about their small-mindedness," I insisted. "But you should," he countered, voice low and intense, "for the children's sake, if not your own. This territory is changing, but not quickly enough. Mixed marriages are tolerated at best, ostracized at worst. Your children would bear that burden, alongside my own, caught between worlds, belonging fully to neither." The pain behind his words, not theoretical but born from lived experience, silenced my immediate objections. This wasn't just about us, or even about securing the land. It was about the future we would create for James and Eliza, the world they would have to navigate long after today's decisions were made. "So you would have me marry John Sullivan," I said finally. "A respectable union that secures our claim and protects the children from prejudice. If he agrees, Talon nodded, though something in his expression belied the certainty of his words. It would be the sensible choice. And if I disagree, I challenged softly, if I believe some things are worth fighting for, even against sensible choices. His eyes, when they met mine again, contained a vulnerability I'd never witnessed before, a brief, unguarded moment when Talon Redhawk wasn't the stoic frontiersman or the skilled scout or the man caught between cultures, but simply a man afraid to hope for what he truly wanted. Then you would be the same remarkable woman who stood her ground against false threats and real dangers, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The woman who rebuilt from ashes what most would have abandoned. The woman who... He paused, something like wonder crossing his features, who has claimed not just this land, but its keeper as her own. The simple admission, so hard-won from this man of few words, moved me more deeply than flowery declarations ever could have. On impulse, I reached for his hand, feeling the calluses and scars that mapped his life's journey. I came west as a mail-order bride, I said quietly, prepared to build a life with a stranger based on practical considerations and mutual benefit. I thought that was courage, being willing to make that bargain for my children's future. I tightened my grip on his hand, but real courage, I've learned, is recognizing when something transcends bargains and practicality, when it becomes a matter of the heart. Talon's fingers closed around mine, his touch conveying what words perhaps could not. Macpherson will use it against you. The prejudice... Let him try, I interrupted, with a fierceness that surprised us both. I've faced him before. We've faced him together. A log shifted in the fire, sending sparks spiraling toward the star-strewn sky. In their brief, brilliant ascent, I saw the choice before me with perfect clarity. The safe, practical path versus the uncertain, challenging one that called to my heart. Ask me, I said softly. Confusion flickered across his face. Ask you? Ask me properly, Talon Redhawk, not with talk of legal solutions or practical arrangements. Ask me what you truly want to ask. Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by something I'd seen only glimpses of before, a hope so carefully guarded he scarcely allowed himself to acknowledge it. With deliberate movements, he turned to face me fully, still holding my hand between both of his. Clara Hargrove, he began, his deep voice steady, despite the vulnerability evident in his gaze. Would you consider joining your path with mine, not just in the building of this homestead, but in the building of a life? Not because it secures legal claim to the land, but because... He hesitated, then continued with quiet certainty, because two hearts that have found each other across impossible distances deserve the chance to journey forward together. It wasn't the polished proposal of a Boston gentleman, nor the practical arrangement of a frontier marriage. It was something far more profound, a recognition of the bond that had formed between us through shared struggle and quiet understanding, through danger faced together and peace discovered side by side. Yes, I whispered, the single word carrying the weight of 1,000 unspoken ones. Yes, I would consider that the greatest privilege of my life. The smile that transformed his face in that moment, rare and unguarded and luminous in the firelight, told me everything his careful words had left unsaid. With gentle reverence, he raised my hand to his lips, the gesture sealing our agreement more solemnly than any written contract. Macpherson will still come, he warned, practical even in this moment of decision. His challenge won't disappear because of our choices. Let him come, I replied, with the quiet confidence I had earned through months of frontier living. This land has taught me that what matters isn't the absence of storms, but what remains standing after they pass. As the fire burned low between us and the Montana night, wrapped us in its vast, star-scattered embrace, I felt a sense of rightness settle into my bones. Whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, McPherson's renewed threats, the community's mixed reaction to our union, the legal battles that surely lay ahead, we would face them as we had faced everything else since that first night at the burned homestead, together, building something new from what others had tried to destroy. Together, creating a home not just of timber and stone, but of courage and conviction. Together, writing a story neither of us could have imagined when a mail-order bride and her twins arrived at a ranch reduced to ashes, only to find it reborn, through the hands of a half-Cherokee scout who had rebuilt not just a homestead, but a future worth fighting for. Snow fell like whispered promises, each flake unique and fleeting, before joining its brethren in the deepening blanket that transformed our valley into something otherworldly. From the warmth of our cabin, I watched the twins' delighted faces, and pressed against the glass window, their breath creating small circles of fog that they quickly wiped away to maintain their view of the winter wonderland. "Do you think Mr. Talon will still come today?" James asked, not turning from his vigil. "The snow's awful deep now." "He'll come," I replied with certainty. "Remember what he told you about walking through snow. Step high, step firm, and don't rush," my son recited obediently, the lessons of frontier survival now as familiar to him as his letters and numbers. Eliza's small finger traced a pattern in the condensation on the window. "Is he bringing the preacher man with him?" The innocent question carried weight far beyond my daughter's understanding. 6 weeks had passed since Talon and I had decided to join our lives, and tomorrow would see that decision formalized before what neighbors would attend, and whatever God watched over this remote corner of Montana territory. "If the snow allows," I answered, busying myself with the bread dough I was kneading. "If not, they'll come when the weather clears." The delay wouldn't trouble me, though anxiety about tomorrow's ceremony had kept me awake much of the night. Not doubt, never that, but awareness of what our union would unleash. Already invitations sent to neighboring homesteaders had revealed the fracture lines in our small community. The Sullivans would attend, of course, along with the German, Carpenter and his wife, but others had declined with thinly veiled excuses, or worse, open disapproval. "Wouldn't mind if the snow kept getting deeper," James muttered, confirming that he'd absorbed more of the tension than I'd hoped. Then only people who really want to come would make the trip. His perceptiveness both pained and impressed me. At nearly 6 years old, my son had developed the watchful awareness of a child who had faced too much upheaval too early. "It's important to you that people come?" I asked carefully. He shrugged with forced nonchalance. "Just don't want Mr. Talon to feel bad if folks stay away 'cause they're stupid about his blood." The simplicity of his assessment, so direct, so uncluttered by the social complexities adults layered over basic prejudice, struck me forcefully. "Some people fear what they don't understand," I explained, setting aside the bread to rise. "But those who matter will be here." Like Neshoba, Eliza piped up, abandoning her window vigil to join us at the table. "Will he come to the wedding too?" The question was reasonable, given Neshoba's sporadic but significant presence in our lives these past months. Since bringing news of McPherson's legal challenge, he had appeared occasionally, sometimes staying for days, other times vanishing as suddenly as he arrived. The twins had developed a fascinated respect for his quiet strength and woodland skills. "Neshoba follows his own path," I replied, though in truth I had no idea if Talon's brother would choose to witness our union. "But he's always near when needed most." As if summoned by our conversation, a movement at the edge of the clearing caught my eye. A tall figure emerged from the tree line, moving through the knee-deep snow with the efficient stride of someone long accustomed to winters. Challenges! Behind him came a second, smaller man I recognized as Reverend Collins from the Mission Church in Billings. "They're here!" James shouted, already racing for his coat and boots. Eliza clapped her mittened hands in excitement, bouncing on her toes. "Wait," I cautioned, catching James by the shoulder before he could burst outside. "Let them reach the porch first. No sense making them search for you in this weather." The restraint cost him dearly, but he nodded with the serious responsibility of a frontier child who understood that impulse could lead to danger in this unforgiving country. Together, we watched through the window as Talon broke trail for the struggling preacher, occasionally extending a steadying hand when the older man faltered in the deeper drifts. By the time they reached our door, I had composed myself into something resembling proper welcome, though my heart raced at the sight of Talon's tall form stamping snow from his boots on our porch. 6 weeks since our decision, and still the simple fact of his presence affected me in ways that would have scandalized my Boston acquaintances. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. "Mrs. Hargrove," Reverend Collins greeted me as he entered, his thin face reddened by cold, but his expression warm. "God's blessings on this household." "Welcome, Reverend," I replied, taking his coat and gloves. "You must be half frozen after such a journey." "Mr. Redhawk kept us to a proper path," he assured me, moving gratefully toward the fire. Remarkable knowledge of the terrain, even obscured by snow. Talon followed, bringing with him the scent of pine and winter air. His dark eyes found mine with that quiet intensity that spoke volumes in silence, then shifted to the twins who hovered impatiently nearby. "Did you bring it?" James asked immediately, propriety forgotten in childish anticipation. A rare smile crossed Talon's face as he reached into his jacket, producing a small wooden carving, a perfectly detailed wolf, head raised in silent howl. "Pine's too soft for lasting work," he explained as James accepted the figure reverently, "but it takes detail well enough for practice pieces." Since our commitment, Talon had been teaching my son wood carving, a skill James approached with the same solemn dedication he brought to all the frontier crafts his mentor shared. Each visit brought a new practice piece and new techniques to master. "It's perfect," James breathed, running his fingers over the smooth curves. "Did you bring something for Eliza too?" My daughter, shyer in her expectations, nevertheless looked up hopefully. Talon crouched to her level, a position I'd seen him adopt countless times with my children, never speaking down to them, always meeting them eye to eye. "Something different for you," he said, producing a small leather pouch from another pocket. "Your mother mentioned you've been collecting special stones from the creek." Eliza nodded solemnly, her collection of colored pebbles and unusual rocks, having grown to nearly fill the wooden box beside her bed. "This is how my mother carried her special things," he explained, opening the drawstring to reveal the pouch's soft deerskin interior, decorated with simple beaded patterns around its edge. "She would say that treasures need a proper home to keep their power." My daughter's expression, as she accepted this gift, wonder mingled with the grave responsibility of caring for something that had belonged to Talon's mother, brought unexpected tears to my eyes. These small moments of connection between my children and the man who would become their stepfather mattered more than any ceremony or legal document. The remainder of the day passed in practical preparations. Reverend Collins, a pragmatic missionary who had served frontier communities for decades, understood the realities of winter weddings. He helped arrange our main room for the small ceremony, moving furniture to create space for the few guests who might brave tomorrow's weather. "Not my first unusual union," he confided, while Talon took the twins outside to gather more firewood. "The frontier has its own rules about suitable matches. Out here, character speaks louder than convention." His acceptance eased one of my deeper concerns. I had worried that even in performing the ceremony, he might convey disapproval or reluctance. Instead, he approached our situation with the practical wisdom of a man who had witnessed far more of life's complexities than his profession might suggest. "McPherson's challenge to your claim continues," he asked, helping me prepare the evening meal. "The Land Office has delayed any decision until spring," I replied, the frustration of bureaucratic maneuvering still fresh despite weeks of correspondence with officials in Helena. "Our marriage will strengthen my legal position, but McPherson has powerful allies." The Reverend nodded thoughtfully. "The railroad's hunger for land respects neither law nor decency. Yet I've observed that those who fight from love of home often outlast those who fight from greed alone." His simple wisdom comforted me more than elaborate assurances might have. This man had witnessed the territory's growing pains firsthand, the clash of interests, cultures, and ambitions that defined Montana's development. If he believed our cause had merit, perhaps we stood a better chance than McPherson's resources would suggest. As evening approached, bringing with it a halt to the snowfall and a sky of crystalline clarity, Talon prepared to depart for his own cabin on the northern edge of our property. Though only a half-mile distant, the structure represented his insistence on propriety until our vows were exchanged, a concession to convention that sometimes frustrated me, but which I understood. Came from his deep respect for my reputation and the twins' place in the community. "The weather should hold through tomorrow," he said, as he gathered his coat and gloves. "Samuel and Martha will likely arrive by midday if the trail remains passable." I followed him onto the porch, grateful for the privacy afforded by the children, helping Reverend Collins prepare his sleeping arrangements inside. In the blue-white glow of moonlight reflected off snow, Talon's features appeared sculpted from shadow and light, his dark eyes holding mine with unspoken emotion. "Tomorrow," I said softly, the single word carrying months of anticipation. His hand, warm despite the cold air, found mine. "Any second thoughts?" "There's still time to consider John Sullivan's offer." The question held no insecurity, only the same careful consideration for my welfare that had characterized his every action since we'd met. John had indeed proposed a marriage of convenience after learning of our situation, a kind, practical offer from a good man who understood the legal protections I needed. "Not one," I assured him, meaning it completely. "Though I'm curious about something." "What's that?" "Your cabin," I said, gesturing toward the northern ridge. "You've been building it since autumn, yet I've never seen inside. The children speak of visiting, but..." I let the question hang unfinished between us. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. A smile touched his lips. "It was meant to be a surprise. For after the wedding, what kind of surprise requires months of secretive construction?" I asked, genuine curiosity overcoming propriety. Talon seemed to consider whether to answer, then reached a decision. "A piano," he said simply. "Ordered from Chicago through Samuel's mercantile connections. Arrived in Billings last month." The revelation stunned me into momentary silence. A piano out here in the wilderness? The extravagance of such a gift, the logistics of transporting it through winter conditions, the thoughtfulness behind remembering my casual mention months ago of missing music in our new life. "How did you manage to..." I began, but the cabin door opened behind us, spilling golden lamplight across the porch. "Mama, Reverend Collins wants to know if we have more honey for his tea," James called, his small figure silhouetted against the warm interior. "I'll be right there," I promised, reluctantly releasing Talon's hand. Tomorrow would bring plenty of time for explanations and discoveries. Tonight, we had a guest to attend to and children to settle for bed. "Until tomorrow," Talon said quietly. The simple farewell containing worlds of meaning between us. I watched him stride away through the snow, his path illuminated by brilliant stars overhead, until the darkness between trees swallowed his tall figure. Only then did I return to the cabin's warmth, to the practical tasks of hospitality and motherhood that had defined my life for so long. Yet, as I moved through these familiar routines, serving tea, answering the Reverend's polite questions about our homestead's progress, helping the twins prepare for bed, my thoughts remained fixed on tomorrow's promise. Not just the ceremony itself, but the life it would formalize, a life I had never imagined when I'd agreed to become Harrison Miller's mail-order bride, yet one that now seemed as inevitable as the changing seasons. Morning arrived with dazzling brightness, sunlight transforming the snow-covered landscape into a sea of diamonds. The twins woke early, too excited to sleep, their endless questions about wedding particulars revealing how significant this day was in their young lives. "Will we have a different name now?" Eliza asked, as I helped her into the special dress. Martha Sullivan had altered for the occasion, one of her own daughter's outgrown garments, lovingly adjusted to fit my small daughter. "No, sweetheart, you'll still be Eliza Hargrove," I explained, smoothing her hair, "but Mr. Talon will be your stepfather, which is a very important position in a family." "Like a father. But different," she persisted, trying to understand relationships. "Beyond her experience. Like a father who chose us," James interjected from where he struggled with the buttons of his best shirt. "Instead of just being born to us. That's better, isn't it, Mama?" The simple wisdom in his assessment brought tears to my eyes for the second time in as many days. "Yes, love. There's something very special about being chosen." By midday, our small cabin had transformed into a gathering place for those hardy souls who braved the winter conditions to witness our union. The Sullivans arrived first, Martha immediately taking charge of final arrangements with her characteristic efficiency. The German carpenter and his wife followed, bringing an elaborate cake that must have required precious stores of sugar and butter. Most surprising were the 3 young couples who had helped with our cabin raising, neighbors who had seemed uncertain about our match, but who arrived bearing simple gifts and genuine good wishes. "Not everyone's narrow-minded," Samuel Sullivan murmured as we watched more neighbors arrive. "Some just needed time to see what was plain before their eyes, that you and Talon belong together on this land. Convention be damned." His blunt assessment made me smile, despite the nervous anticipation fluttering in my stomach. Beyond the immediate circle of wedding preparations, I could see the broader meaning of this gathering. Not just witnesses to a marriage, but allies in the continuing struggle to protect our claim. Each person who attended made a statement about where they stood in the community's divided response to our union. When Talon finally arrived, the transformation in his appearance momentarily stole my breath. Gone were the practical frontier clothes I'd grown accustomed to seeing him in. Instead, he wore a formal suit of dark wool, clearly new and tailored to his powerful frame. His hair, usually tied back with simple practicality, had been trimmed and arranged with care. The overall effect was striking, not an attempt to appear more civilized by Eastern standards, but rather a man honoring an important occasion in his own way. Only his eyes remained unchanged, dark, steady, and fixed on mine as he entered the cabin with quiet dignity that silenced the chattering guests. "You look beautiful," he said softly when he reached my side, the simple compliment meaning more from this man of few words than elaborate poetry from another. "As do you," I replied, feeling a blush warm my cheeks despite my age and experience. "I didn't know you owned such finery." A hint of amusement touched his expression. Nashoba's influence. He insisted certain occasions demand proper respect. The mention of his brother made me glance toward the door, half expecting to see the enigmatic figure materialize. "Will he join us?" In his own way, Talon answered cryptically. "He performed a blessing ceremony at dawn, according to our mothers." Traditions, he said that was his contribution to our union. The knowledge that Neshoba had in his own fashion blessed our marriage, touched me deeply. Though he remained apart from settler society, his acknowledgement mattered, to Talon certainly, but increasingly to me as well. Reverend Collins called. For our attention then, gathering the assembled guests around the hearth where he would perform the ceremony. Simple wooden chairs had been arranged in a semicircle, with the twins given places of honor in the front row beside Martha. As ceremonies. Go! Ours was brief and unembellished, frontier practicality rather than Eastern elaboration. The Reverend spoke of commitment and partnership, of building homes and lives together in challenging circumstances. No mention was made of obedience or subjugation, those traditional elements that had always seemed at odds with the reality of survival in this harsh land. When the time came to exchange our vows, Talon surprised me by speaking in both English and Cherokee, the unfamiliar syllables of his mother's language flowing with quiet reverence as he promised to walk beside me through whatever paths life presented. I, Talon Redhawk, join my life to yours, he concluded in English, his deep voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. Not as conqueror or protector, but as equal partner in whatever joys and sorrows come. This land has taught me that true strength lies not in standing alone against storms, but in finding roots deep enough to weather them together. My own vows, prepared carefully in the quiet hours of recent nights, suddenly seemed inadequate in the face of his eloquence. Yet when I began to speak, the words flowed with unexpected ease. I came to this territory seeking security, bringing only hope and determination to exchange for a future. What I found instead was a home built not from timber and stone, but from courage and conviction. My voice strengthened as I continued, drawing from the deep well of certainty that had grown within me these past months. I promised to walk beside you through all seasons, to face challenges without retreating, to celebrate joys without reservation, and to remember always that our greatest strength lies in the bonds we've chosen to forge together. The twins, solemn-faced and attentive throughout the ceremony, approached when the Reverend beckoned them forward. We had discussed this inclusion extensively, wanting them to understand they weren't merely observers, but active participants in the new family being formed. Do you, James and Eliza Hargrove, welcome Talon Redhawk into your family? Reverend Collins asked, adapting the traditional ceremony to acknowledge their place in our union. We do, they answered in perfect unison, having practiced this response. With intense seriousness, Talon crouched to their level, that gesture of respect I'd seen countless times, and extended his hands to them both. And I promise to honor your mother, protect your home, share my knowledge, and respect your spirits as they grow and change. The simplicity and sincerity of this exchange affected our guests visibly. Martha dabbed at her eyes, while Samuel cleared his throat repeatedly. Even the younger couples, who had seemed uncertain about attending, appeared moved by the evident bonds already formed between my children and their new stepfather. When Reverend Collins finally pronounced us husband and wife, the cheer that rose from our small gathering surprised me with its enthusiasm. These neighbors, some still cautious about our unconventional match, nonetheless recognized the authentic commitment before them and responded with genuine goodwill. The celebration that followed transformed our cabin into a whirlwind of conversation, and music, courtesy of the German carpenter's fiddle, and generous helpings of wedding cake. The twins moved excitedly between guests, accepting congratulations and sweets with equal enthusiasm. I found myself surrounded by the neighboring women, their initial reserve melting into practical questions and advice about married life that sometimes made me blush despite my previous experience. Through it all, Talon remained close, his hand occasionally finding mine in quiet reassurance. Though never demonstrative in public, the subtle ways he acknowledged our new connection, a gentle touch at my elbow, a shared glance across the room, the protective stance when he stood beside me, spoke volumes to those observant enough to notice. As afternoon lengthened toward evening and the winter sun began its early descent, our guests gradually departed. First the young families with children to settle before dark, then the more distant neighbors concerned about navigating snow-covered trails in failing light. By the time true evening arrived, only the Sullivans remained, helping restore order to our celebration-disrupted home. "We'll take the children for the night," Martha announced matter-of-factly, ignoring my half-formed protests. "Samuel's bringing the sleigh around now. They've packed their things and are excited for an adventure at our place." The arrangement, clearly planned in advance without my knowledge, brought heat to my cheeks, even as gratitude for Martha's practical friendship washed through me. The wedding night, that unspoken tradition that suddenly loomed with both anticipation and uncertainty. "The Reverend's already left for the Petersons' place," she continued, answering my unasked question about our other guest. "Wanted to reach there before full dark. Everything's settled, Clara. Just enjoy your first evening as a proper family." The twins, bundled in their warmest clothes and practically vibrating with excitement about the promised sleigh ride, hugged me fiercely before turning to Talon with equal enthusiasm. "We'll be back tomorrow," James confirmed, suddenly hesitant despite his adventure-seeking nature. "By midday," Talon assured him, ruffling his hair affectionately, "and then we'll all visit the surprise I've been building." This reminder of the mysterious piano rekindled their excitement, all uncertainty forgotten in the promise of finally seeing Talon's secret project. With final hugs and admonitions to behave for the Sullivans, they were gone, swept away in Samuel's sleigh with Martha, leaving Talon and me truly alone together for the first time since our acquaintance began. The silence that followed their departure hummed with unspoken thoughts. We stood in the center of our cabin, our home now in every sense, surrounded by the evidence of celebration, yet suddenly returned to the same careful distance we'd maintained throughout our complex relationship. "Well," I said finally, breaking the silence with forced lightness, "I should see to the remaining dishes before—" Talon's hand caught mine gently, stopping my retreat into practical tasks. "Clara," he said simply, the word carrying a world of meaning in his deep voice. I met his gaze, finding in those dark eyes everything words struggled to express. Desire carefully restrained by respect, joy tempered by awareness of the challenges. Still facing us, and beneath it all, a steadfast certainty about the path we'd chosen together. "We are truly married now," I said softly, stating the obvious to fill the charged silence between us. A smile touched his lips. Not the rare, full smile I'd seen directed at the twins, but something more intimate, meant only for me. "In the eyes of your law and my mother's traditions, 2 ceremonies, 1 truth. And what truth is that?" I asked, my voice steadier than my racing heart. His free hand rose to touch my cheek with a gentleness that belied his strength. "That some paths, once joined, cannot be separated without destroying something essential in both." The poetry of his words, so unexpected from this man of practical action, moved me deeply. Without conscious thought, I leaned into his touch, closing the careful distance we'd maintained through months of shared work and growing feelings. "Show me the piano," I whispered impulsively, needing suddenly to see this gift that represented so much of who we were together, frontier practicality shaped by deeper currents of feeling and aspiration. His surprise at my request quickly transformed into understanding. "Now, in the dark." "The moon is full," I replied, already reaching for my heavy coat and boots. "And I find I need to see this evidence of our future before we close the door on today." He didn't question further, simply helping me with my winter garments before donning his own. We stepped out into a night transformed by moonlight and fresh snow, a private wonderland that glittered with crystalline perfection under the vast Montana sky. Without discussion, Talon took my hand as we began the walk to his cabin on the northern ridge. Though the snow was deep, he had clearly maintained a packed trail between the two structures, making our journey possible even in darkness. We walked in comfortable silence, our breaths forming shared clouds in the cold air, our joined hands a warm anchor in the winter night. As we crested the final rise, his cabin came into view, larger than I'd expected, built with the same careful craftsmanship that characterized everything Talon created. Light glowed from within, spilling golden rectangles onto the snow through windows I hadn't realized existed from my distant observations. "You left a lamp burning?" I asked, surprised by this impractical use of precious oil. "No," he replied, a curious note in his voice. "I extinguished everything before leaving for the ceremony." Caution immediately replaced our relaxed pace. Talon released my hand, motioning for me to stay slightly behind him as we approached. Though McPherson's direct threat had receded with his reassignment, the memory of past dangers remained fresh enough to warrant prudence. Yet as we drew closer, a familiar figure materialized on the cabin's porch, tall, straight-backed, unmistakable even in shadow. "Nashoba!" Talon identified with evident relief, calling a greeting in Cherokee as we approached. His brother descended the porch steps to meet us, his expression unreadable in the moonlight. "Brother," he acknowledged, then turned to me with a formal nod. "Sister," the simple acceptance implicit in that greeting, recognizing me as family now rather than merely Talon's choice, affected me more deeply than elaborate congratulations might have. "You've seen to the cabin," Talon observed, gratitude evident in his voice. Nashoba nodded once. "A husband should bring his wife to a properly prepared home. I built the fire, arranged what was needed." His eyes, so like Talon's yet somehow wilder, met mine directly. "The instrument is tuned. I remembered how." This unexpected detail, that Nashoba possessed knowledge of piano tuning, reminded me how little I truly knew about either brother's past. How many layers remained to be discovered, how many stories waited to be shared in the years stretching before us. "Thank you," I said simply, knowing he preferred directness to elaboration. With another nod, Nashoba stepped past us, moving toward the tree line. "I go north tomorrow," he announced. "The Blackfoot have news of McPherson's movements that may interest you. I will return when the snow thaws." Before either of us could respond to this cryptic statement, he had melted into the darkness with that uncanny ability both brothers possessed, leaving us alone before the waiting cabin. "He has always moved between worlds more freely than I," Talon explained as we ascended the porch steps, "coming and going according to rhythms few understand." At the threshold, he paused, meeting my eyes with unexpected solemnity. "This was built for you, for us, whether or not our paths joined. Officially, I wanted you to have a place of your own. If anything happened to me, or if the community's response to our relationship became too difficult for the children." The revelation stunned me, that he had created this second home not just as a temporary bachelor quarters, but as security for my future, regardless of how our personal relationship evolved. "You built us an escape," I whispered, understanding dawning. "I built you options," he corrected gently. "The frontier teaches harsh lessons about preparation and unexpected turns in the trail." With that simple explanation, so characteristic of this man who showed love through practical provision rather than flowery declarations, he opened the door and ushered me into what would become our second home. The interior took my breath away. Unlike the functional simplicity of our main cabin, this space had been crafted with an artistry I hadn't expected. The main room featured not just the promised piano, a beautiful upright model positioned near stone fireplace, but built-in. Bookshelves already partially filled, comfortable chairs with actual upholstery, and most surprisingly, windows of real glass strategically placed to capture both morning and afternoon light. "How did you manage all this?" I asked, turning slowly to take in details that spoke of months of secret work and resources I wouldn't have believed available in this remote territory. "Samuel has connections with merchants in Chicago and St. Louis," Talon explained, watching my reaction with evident satisfaction. "And I saved the payment from years of army scouting. It seemed fitting to use it for something that mattered." I moved toward the piano, my fingers hovering above keys I hadn't touched since leaving Boston. "It's extraordinary," I whispered, overcome by the thought that had gone into this gift. Not just the instrument itself, but the entire space designed for music, reading, contemplation. "Not just a house," Talon said quietly, coming to stand beside me. "A home. One that honors both worlds we come from while creating something new between them." As moonlight streamed through the windows and firelight danced across the carefully crafted interior, I recognized the truth in his words. This cabin represented everything our union aspired to be, respecting traditions while building something unique, acknowledging difficulties while creating beauty despite them, preparing for challenges while celebrating connection. I turned to face the man who was now my husband in every sense, the Half-Cherokee scout who had rebuilt not just a homestead from ashes, but my belief in possibilities I'd thought forever lost. "Play something," he requested softly. "I've imagined the sound since the day it arrived." Without further hesitation, I settled onto the bench and placed my hands on keys cool and smooth beneath my fingers. For a moment, I hesitated, years of disuse making me uncertain, but then muscle memory took over and music filled the cabin, simple at first, then gaining confidence as I remembered pieces once played in drawing rooms and parlors a lifetime ago. Talon stood silently listening, his expression one of wonder that this man of hard practicality would rarely show the world. In that moment, watching him absorb the music while moonlight bathed us both in silver, I understood with perfect clarity that our unlikely union, a Boston widow and a frontier scout of mixed heritage, wasn't a compromise forced by circumstance, but a gift neither of us had dared expect. When the final notes faded into the warm air of our second home, Talon extended his hand to me, a gesture that bridged cultures and experiences, past and future, caution and certainty. "Welcome home, Clara Redhawk," he said simply. I placed my hand in his, rising to stand beside the man who had transformed from stranger to protector to partner through the crucible of frontier challenges. "Home," I agreed, the word holding new, layers of meaning in this place we had built together. Outside, snow continued to blanket our valley in pristine white, while somewhere in the distance, a wolf called to its pack, wild and free beneath the winter moon. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, McPherson's continued threats, the community's mixed acceptance, the practical work of surviving Montana winters. But tonight belonged to us alone, to the unlikely family forged from mail-order arrangements, and burned homesteads from cultural divides and shared courage. "No matter what comes," I said softly, "this, what we've built together, was worth every step of the journey." Talon's arms encircled me with the careful strength I'd come to treasure, his heartbeat steady against mine. "Every step," he agreed, his deep voice resonating with certainty, "and every step still to come." As night deepened around our lamplight sanctuary, I knew with unshakable conviction that whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, we would face them as we had faced everything else since that first night when a mail-order bride with 2 children had arrived at a burned ranch, only to find something far more precious than the security she had sought. A love powerful enough to rebuild worlds from ashes, strong enough to stand against prejudice and danger, and enduring enough to transform strangers into family beneath the vast Montana sky.